Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 181 to 200. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Adjusting his leather jacket and moving his right arm in circles, the redhead moved through the dark sewer with silent steps. Half an hour had passed since he tricked Flora and he was now looking for a way out of the sewers. After taking a turn, he saw at the end of the tunnel some ladders going up. This made him smile, and lowering his arm he walked quickly towards it. Finally, I already thought that I would have to go back the way I came in, the redhead thought, cheering as he reached the ladder. Putting his foot on the first bar he began to climb them quickly. Reaching the top he found the familiar manhole cover but he didn't move it yet, he first focused on his senses and listened outside of it. The rather distant sound of heavy-booted footsteps reached their ears and so did the tinkle of the lamps they held. They're quite far, the redhead concluded, so now ready he placed his hands on the manhole cover and pushed. The first thing that Adrian noticed was that he could see the crimson moon. It was no longer at the highest point in the sky but it was already falling. In a few hours it would be lost on the horizon and the sun would rise, but meanwhile so much so the city was still being softly illuminated by its crimson light. Lowering his gaze and looking around, he saw that the street was very clean and well maintained. He also saw the people in the background that he had heard before. They were moving around with lamps in their hands and they were dressed in police uniforms. Also, the houses were very big and fine looking. The smell of this area was good. He saw all this in 5 seconds, and not wanting to spend more time in the middle of the street, he ran towards the darkest area he saw, which was an alley. Adrian's expression was a worried and annoyed one. Shit. Why here of all places? Arriving at the alley, he used the walls and jumped several times, and used several of the pipes that were there to reach the ceiling. He didn't stay still and he started running for it, and reaching the end he took a big jump reaching another building. He kept running and repeated the same process several times without stopping. Flora seeing this frowned. It seemed that the redhead wanted to leave this area as quickly as possible. Adrian, what's wrong with you? Hearing the question, he just clicked his tongue but he didn't slow down but increased his speed and only gave a short answer. We're in the West Borough. The short answer only annoyed and confused Flora, who snorted. And what does that have to do with you being so weird? We're just near a place where a very annoying 3-flavored soup is sealed. Adrian thought, annoyed but didn't answer Flora's question. Having been ignored again, Flora growled and fell silent. Adrian appreciated that and just kept running at top speed to leave West Borough as quickly as possible. The crimson moon was already halfway down the horizon and the sun was slowly rising. Letting out a breath he wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the rising sun. An exasperated sigh in his ear caused a smile to form on his face. What's up, Flora? Tired from the trip? You already left West Borough half an hour ago, so why keep running? Is this a morning jog? Ads by PubFuture. The insult only made Adrian laugh. But that was true, he had left West Borough a while ago but kept running. Although it is mainly to get further away from the soup area, there is also something else. It's quite simple now. I'm going to Hillston Borough, he said calmly as he did some stretching. There was still a good distance to run and he wasn't planning to stop again, so he better prepares his body. Why? She asked with small curiosity while looking at the redhead. I'm going to visit a friend. With that said, he stopped stretching and started running again. He was like a blur from the speed at which he moved. Knock knock. Master Staten, it's already 7:20 a.m. After a soft knock on a door and a man's voice sounded, waking up a lying figure. Opening his eyes and rising slightly, Isengard responded. I'm awake, thank you, Isengard replied. It's my job, master. I'll be downstairs preparing your breakfast, the man said, and Isengard listened as he walked away. Scratching his eyes for a few moments, he removed the blanket that covered him and went to his bathroom. Drying his hands and face, Isengard left the bath, but looking up he froze in place. Leaning against the wall was someone he was very familiar with. Adrian, what are you doing here? He asked curiously, recovering from his surprise, and Adrian raised his right hand. I'm sorry to bother you so early, teacher Isengard, but something happened last night. I was attacked at home by a Beyander duo, a Sequence 5 Wraith, and a Sequence 9 prisoner. I was forced to blow up my house to escape, the redhead explained, and Isengard widened his eyes in surprise. Sequence 5. And Adrian managed to escape. The man thought in shock, but then he frowned and looked the redhead up and down, scanning for injuries. He noticed how there was a palm mark on his neck, a sign of the force with which it was squeezed. There were also fingernail marks on it. He could also see how the redhead had some discomfort in his right shoulder. Are you okay? Any serious injuries? I have some potions that treat various ailments in case you need them, Isengard said seriously, but Adrian shook his head. I'm fine, just a few injuries, but my body can take care of them. What I need is your help with something else. Isengard only nodded, accepting the redhead's words. What do you need, Adrian? The Beyonders that attacked me are dangerous, especially the Wraith. I know them quite well and they will receive reinforcements soon. I don't know when exactly, but when they arrive it shouldn't be difficult for them to track me down. So our classes will have to stop for your sake, Teacher Isengard, he said seriously, and Isengard's frown deepened. Are you sure about this, Adrian? If those reinforcements haven't arrived yet, I can contact the church and it won't be a problem to send you to Lindbergh where you'll be safe. Isengard's words made Adrian smile and he felt warm inside. Ads by PubFuture. That would be the best, but I still have too many things to do here. I still have to get the potion formula, sequence 6 conspirator, the meeting of the Hermits of Fate, and Will's mission. I still can't leave Backland, Adrian thought before sighing as he shakes his head. Thank you for that, Teacher Isengard, but I refuse. I have many issues to solve in Backland, so leaving is impossible. At the redhead's words, Isengard approached Adrian. When he got in front of the redhead, he held his shoulders and spoke. Adrian, are you sure about that? Although I'm not familiar with a Wraith, I am familiar with Beyondera of Sequence 5 and their power is something you should not underestimate, Isengard said with absolute seriousness, and Adrian smiled. You don't have to worry about that, Teacher Isengard. I also know the power of Sequence 5 even better than you, he said as he separated the detective's hands from his shoulders. As he did so, he continued talking. I know how to hide from them, so I'll be fine, he said confidently, and Isengard stared into his student's face. After a few moments in silence, the man just sighed while nodding. If you're sure of that, it's fine, but if you feel like you can't do it, just come back here and I'll make sure you get to Lindbergh safely. Thank you, teacher, the redhead said with a soft smile to Isengard, who nodded again. You said you needed something, what was it? The redhead let out an awkward laugh while scratching his head. I was wondering if you were willing to give me the books on ancient Hermes, Jotun, and Dragonese so I could study, because we won't be able to have classes anymore, Adrian said with slight embarrassment, and this surprised Isengard again, who looked at his student in astonishment. Despite being in such a dangerous situation, is he still thinking about learning? With that thought, Isengard smiled proudly as he nodded. I have no problem, Adrian, after all I don't need them, I just like to read them from time to time. Wait here while I go for them. Adrian just nodded and watched as Isengard left the room for a few moments before returning with a bag in hand. Here, there is also something I was planning to teach you when you mastered Elvish, Isengard said proudly, and Adrian took the bag with a raised eyebrow. Opening it, he saw how the books he requested from ancient Hermes, Jotun, Dragonese, and even one from Elvish were, but there was also another one with a purple cover that caught his attention. The cover of the book had a phrase written in Hermes. Eyes widening in surprise, he looked up at Isengard, who was looking at him with a smile. It is a good book and quite extensive. I am sure that you will be able to master everything written in it. Thank you, teacher, the redhead said, extremely grateful. He approached the older man and gave him a big hug. Isengard was taken aback for a moment before handing it back. Not wanting to make the detective feel uncomfortable, Adrian pulled away after a few moments. Take care, teacher. You too, said the man with a sad smile. Adrian just nodded and took a damaged black band from his pocket and placed it on his left arm. The redhead approached the shadow of the wall before Isengard's eyes. He turned around and smiled at the detective. Thank you for everything, Isengard. I'll be writing you letters to let you know how I'm doing, Adrian said in perfect Elvish, and this surprised Isengard, but before he could say anything, the shadows enveloped the redhead, who disappeared from the room. Looking where Adrian had been before with wide eyes, Isengard froze for a few moments but recovered with a sigh as he shook his head. What a curious student, the detective said with a sad smile as he left his room and went to have breakfast. In an old and small room, an old man and a man was talking. The bathroom is on the first floor, in the back, explained an old and almost bald man to a man with a workman's hat and dirt on his face. The worker was dressed in the clothes of any other worker and had a bag on his shoulder. he was also quite stooped, but the most curious thing was his red eyes. Understood. Hearing the rough and tired voice, the old man just shook his head. He handed the red-eyed worker a key and he grabbed it with his hands wrapped in dirty bandages. The payment will be every 15th of the month. If you can't pay, I'll kick you out and your things will be the payment, so you better be up to date, the old man growled as he left the room and slammed the door. Listening as the footsteps were moving away, the worker just sighed as he straightened up and took off his hat, showing his beautiful red hair. What a fucking room, Adrian said in disgust. The bed was old and the sheets were yellow. He could smell several strange odors in it that made his disgust increase. The odors varied in origin, but they were all products of the human body. The floor was very dusty and the only furniture in the room was a small table and an old chair, also a small wardrobe that was broken in several parts. Seeing this, he just sighed as he placed the bag on the table and took out a broom brush along with a rag. The first thing he did was toss the dirty pillows to one side and remove those filthy sheets, and this allowed him to see the multiple holes in the thin mattress through which the stuffing was coming out. At least it doesn't have springs, the redhead murmured as he went to the bag and took out a clean and thick sheet along with a small pillow. He wrapped the mattress in this sheet and placed the pillow on top of the bed. Now the room looked much better and all he had done was change the sheets and pillows. While he was cleaning, he heard Flora's amused laugh. It's so much fun watching you act like a servant, Flora said between laughs, and Adrian just sighed as he used the rag to clean the wardrobe. He would now live in a hotel in the East Borough. He first thought of using a hotel in a better area but decided to use this one because he did not have to worry about implicating innocent people if he were attacked again. This hotel was one known in the East Borough because it was one controlled by various gangs, and even that old man was a member of one. This hotel was a good one, but only gang members could afford the price of living in it. Thanks to that, he did not have to worry about harming innocent people because there were no innocent people here. Ads by PubFuture. I could even set this building on fire, and if everyone in this burns I won't feel bad, the redhead thought darkly. Although of course, that would be after robbing them. With the furniture clean, he grabbed the broom brush and began to clean the floor. Tomorrow I'll go check how Zio is doing concerning what I asked her. I'll also take advantage and write her a letter to let her know that the meeting place has changed. Also maybe I can tell Marich about Steve, the man thought seriously. After a while, the room was finally clean and Adrian nodded satisfied with that. Now with a more livable room, he sat on the bed while he took out a handkerchief and wiped his face with it. With his clean face, he lay back on the bed. He reached into his pocket and took out a beautiful pocket watch and opened it. The hands of clock marked 2:40 p.m. Seeing that the tarot club was still a little far away, he closed the pocket watch and put it away. Closing his eyes, he let his mind wander. Now I can take advantage of the fact that I'm in the East Borough and investigate the whereabouts of those policemen. If I'm lucky, I might get something by the end of this week. It's also been a while since I notified the churches, so Joseph should be dead by now. That means their activity here should be much less and the chances of running into them are low. That thought caused a sharp smile to form on his face. That means I can go out as Mr. Holmes again, so digesting what's left of my potions shouldn't be hard thanks to that. I have just under 700 pounds left, but that's no problem after all. The gangs here have plenty of money I can steal. But now I better go back to the matter of Steve. Why did he attack me? It can't be just because of those documents, right? He must want something more, but what? I don't remember having something that interests you. Maybe it's the characteristics of the Beander that I killed. When that thought passed through his head, he kept thinking, but then he shook his head. I can't be sure of that. The only thing I can be sure of is that he wanted me dead because he went for the kill from the first moment, although it makes sense. In this world the dead speak, and whatever he needed he would get it with my death. A possibility hit his head, causing him to open his eyes. He doesn't think I know where Marich and Sharon are, right? He doesn't have any evidence on that, so he shouldn't have that possibility in mind. Another thought came to his head that made him frown. Maybe, if I put myself in Steve's shoes, this would be what I know. An unknown person murdered one of my men, and not only that but also took some documents that were encrypted. Why? If they are encrypted, why take them if they don't work for you? Unless he knows how to do it, but that's impossible. Ads by PubFuture. According to the survivor, he was low sequence, so how would he know how to decrypt it? Unless he knew someone who knew how. The memory of Marich quickly deciphering the documents came to his head, and this made him raise a hand to his face. The fact that Marich decrypted them so quickly should have caught my attention. It's very possible that it's a Rose school of thought method. The fact that the documents weren't in my house should have bolstered the idea that I gave them to someone. He wants to kill me to find out who that someone is, and he has very good reasons to believe that it is who he is looking for. Now he raised both hands to his head as he sighed. He wants to use me to find out where Marich and Sharon are. As soon as that thought crossed his mind, he just opened his mouth. I'm an unlucky bastard, Adrian said, defeated, as he covered his face with his hands. Flora, listening to the redhead's words, huffed but said nothing. She was the real unlucky bastard. He was already worried by the time Jason and Tyre arrived in Backland, but now he had to worry even more since he would be the main target. It's a good thing I got away from Isengard before they arrived, the redhead thought with relief. Sensing that the time had come, he put his hand in his pocket and brought out Hangover Time again. Opening it, he saw that it was a minute before 3 p.m. Flora, I'm going to take a short nap, don't bother me, he said as he laid his head on the pillow and closed his eyes, and began counting in his mind. Good for me, I'll have time for myself, answered Flora without haste. 56, 57, 58, 59. 60 feet. As soon as he counted the number 60, a crimson light enveloped him. ... Opening his eyes and looking around, Adrian found himself back in his high back seat at the long, tall bronze table. Looking to his side, he saw where the figures of Audrey and Alger were sitting. And the most important one was sitting on the seat of honor covered in the thick gray mist. One hand was flat touching the table while the other was scratching his chin. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool, Audrey shouted with a cheery voice. Following that greeting, she turned to look at Alger, and with the same tone, she greeted him. Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man. Alger didn't answer but just gave a soft nod. Seeing this, Adrian couldn't stop one of the corners of his mouth from subconsciously turning up into a small smile. Miss Justice reminds me of my little cousin, she also used to greet me with that tone, thought the redhead with a feeling of warmth on his chest. Audrey turned her gaze to the farthest man and her posture became calmer. Good afternoon, Mr. Chariot, her tone became serene and calm, no longer showing the emotion of before. This made Adrian feel a pang in his chest, but he covered it perfectly, not showing that it affected him, and responded with a nod. As Audrey greeted him, she looked away from the man in the strange robe and returned her attention to the figure covered in thick gray fog, who observed this with what she believed to be calm. Klein actually watched this with one corner of his mouth twitching. Miss Justice, according to Mr. Chariot, is noble, right? Isn't she a bit unsophisticated? Does she seriously think I'm a nice guy? Also, the way she treated Chariot seems a bit childish. I don't think she has forgiven how he provoked her last week. It seems that they protected her very well to maintain that innocence at this age. Klein made a judgment of Justice's personality, but seeing as she turned to look at him, he smiled and maintained his unfathomable image. Good afternoon, Miss Justice. As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly and brought his left hand to his glabella, and touched it twice. Audrey and Alger didn't pay the slightest attention to that movement, but Adrian straightened up and became serious. Here it comes, please Klein, don't explode, the redhead thought worriedly, seeing how Klein fixed his gaze on Audrey. The moment Klein activated his spiritual vision, everything he saw in front of him changed. Auras appeared around Alger and Audrey, which quickly caught his attention. He shifted his gaze to Audrey, who was standing next to him, completely ignoring the aura of the man farther away. The colors of Miss Justice's emotions are red and yellow mixed with a bit of green. That's joy, zeal, excitement, and a bit of annoyance. The latter confused Klein a bit, but he noticed how Justice seemed to be giving the farthest man a side eye. Of course, changing his gaze to his opposite side, he saw the Hanged Man. Like Justice, there was nothing special about the Hanged Man's colors. His emotions were blue mixed with some orange. Calm, thoughtful, careful, and a little pleased. Being his first attempt, Klein came to a conclusion without much confidence. Just when he was about to shift his gaze to Chariot, he saw something deep inside the Hanged Man. Klein focused his mind and took another careful look. He could faintly see that within the Hanged Man's ether body was a deep blue, akin to the sea. It felt like a tidal storm. Having an idea of what that could mean, he returned his gaze to Justice and saw that there was nothing inside her ether body. This confirmed his theory. Ads by PubFuture. That should be something exclusive to the Beyonders, and since this is my home ground, I can see things that old Neil did not manifest, and from what it seems the Hanged Man is a Beyonder stronger than him, Klein analyzed and concluded while the Hanged Man and Chariot finished their greetings. Audrey returned her gaze to the man in front of her and asked in anticipation. Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the box of Ghost Shark's blood? Seeing the opportunity for Klein to stop using his spiritual vision, Adrian decided to grab it by the neck and squeeze it with all his might. Time to create drama. Oh, so Ghost Shark blood, huh? Adrian asked curiously and amused, and this made Audrey freeze, realizing her mistake. I was so excited to receive the formula that I forgot Chariot was there. Audrey thought in alarm as she looked at Adrian uncomfortably while Alger sighed to calm down. Seeing what was happening in front of him, Klein quickly touched his glabella again twice, turning off his spiritual vision, although somewhat resigned. I would have preferred to be able to see Mr. Chariot's ether body. I wonder how strong he is compared to Mr. Hanged Man. Stronger or weaker? Seeing that his distraction had worked, Adrian chuckled, but Alger and Audrey mistook this for something else. Before either of them could say anything, Adrian turned his gaze to Alger, who straightened up and returned his gaze to the man. You needed Ghost Shark blood, huh? Tell me then, Mr. Hanged Man, have you already been promoted to Seafarer, or are you still waiting? There was a subtle taunt in the man's voice that Alger detected, and it made him grind his teeth to keep from reacting. The name Seafarer immediately caught the attention of Klein and Audrey. Seafarer. Due to his reaction, that should be the name of Mr. Hanged Man's next sequence. Mr. Chariot is terrifying. He only had to listen to one ingredient and he already discovered what exact sequence Mr. Hanged Man is. Klein thought incredulously. If I'm not careful with my words, my mask as a powerful existence will fall off. Audrey, on the other hand, was much more scared about something else. I revealed my deal with the Hanged Man to Chariot. Please don't get mad and don't give me Spectator's potion formula for that. Audrey thought, worried and anxious as she watched the interaction between Alger and Adrian. But Adrian wasn't done with him yet. How I would have loved to see your face. I bet your brow furrowed so deeply that it almost came out your ass. Adrian said provocatively, and Alger this time clenched his fists to avoid reacting. Before things escalated further, Adrian gave a short laugh as he raised his hand and waved it. But don't worry, I'm not interested in your deal. In fact, I prefer that it be completed and we continue with the meeting. This time Adrian's voice was no longer provocative but calm. Alger only let out a trembling sigh as he turned to look at the figure sitting at the top. Mr. Fool, I would like another private exchange with Miss Justice. Alger spoke with all the respect he could muster, and Klein nodded gently. It's no big deal. His voice was serene and he made the gray mist cover Adrian, cutting him off. Cursing in the face of a great existence, Chariot has guts, Klein thought, rather impressed as he cut through Adrian's senses. It's done. With his notice given, Alger nodded deeply to the figure as he turned to look at Audrey. Thank you very much. It met my expectations perfectly. I never expected you to send it to me so quickly, Alger said frankly. He seemed much calmer now. Ads by PubFuture. Audrey smiled with great relief when she heard that. I am very happy with this outcome. It seems that her fear was in vain. The blood was obtained from her family's vault because it was kept in a large bottle and the amount they had was not marked. No one would notice that a little bit disappeared. And if that happened, she doubts that her parents would pursue the matter. Alger took a deep look at the fool who was covered in mist before returning his gaze to Audrey and smiling. According to our agreement, I will tell you the formula of the potion, Spectator. Let me get myself ready. All right, begin. Audrey inhaled as she focused her full attention on what Alger was going to say. Low sequence potions are very easy to concoct. Just follow the order that I will provide you. You must remember that there may be smaller amounts of the ingredients that I will give you, but no more. That would cause a bigger problem. You must have heard news about the Beyonders, the Lost Control. Alger first mentioned. Audrey nodded gently and said, I completely understand. Alger just nodded at that and spoke. Now I will tell you the Spectator formula. Spectator. Formula sequence 9. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence. 13 grams of cow teeth peonal powder. 7 petals of elf flowers. A matured manhole fish's eyeball. Add 35 milliliters of goat horn blackfish blood. The last 2 items are the main ingredients. They are ocean creatures, be careful. Alright, Audrey recalled and repeated, 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow peonal powder. Alger remembered and Audrey nodded. With Alger's help, Audrey managed to memorize the entire formula, though she seemed troubled as she muttered it over and over again. Do you know about cogitation? Seeing Justice nod, he continued, I don't know how much you know about cogitation. So let me describe it once. After consuming the potion, quickly enter cogitation to control your spirituality and energy. Klein heard the entire conversation and had no desire to interrupt. He was memorizing everything the hanged man said, but when the hanged man was explaining cogitation, he remembered something. Audrey listened carefully to what the hanged man was saying when suddenly they both heard the knocking on the table. They both turned their gaze to the fool. They realized that the mysterious and powerful figure was gently tapping the table with his finger. He spoke in a deep voice. What you said reminded me of something. Did you end your private exchange so I can free Mr. Chariot? Realizing that the mysterious existence wanted to reveal information, the first to speak was Alger. Yes, Mr. Fool, we are done. The fool didn't say anything but just nodded gently and made the mist that surrounded Adrian disappear, and everyone could see how he was leaning back in his chair. Seeing that he was being watched, Adrian just calmly straightened up. Mr. Chariot, Mr. Hanged Man reminded me of something I hadn't told any of you yet regarding potions. The fool's voice was deep and serene. It's not about grasping them, but rather digesting them. It's not about discovery, but rather acting. The name of the potion is not only symbolic but also imaginary. It is the key to digestion. Ads by PubFuture. Audrey was stunned and confused at that. She wasn't sure what Mr. Fool was trying to express. She subconsciously looked at the hanged man for a reaction using the corners of her eyes. She was surprised to see him jolt and freeze. It was as if ordinary people heard the sudden loud clap of thunder. Digest, act, digest, act, digest, act. She managed to hear the man repeat over and over again softly as if possessed. Such a reaction surprised her and she quickly turned her gaze to the farthest man expecting a similar reaction. But she was surprised again to see how Chariot was with his arms crossed and calm, as if what he had just heard was something he already knew. Klein also watched the reactions of Justice and the hanged man and was pleased. But seeing that Chariot seemed just as calm as before, he just sighed internally. Mr. Chariot seems more and more mysterious. It seems that he knows exactly what I just said and I still don't understand it, Klein thought with some bitterness. Before he could continue thinking about it, he saw how the hanged man turned to look at him. Thank you very much, Mr. Fool. Your hint is as valuable as my life. You have enlightened me greatly. Of course, I think I have yet to fully understand or comprehend it, he said with a hoarse voice. Klein kept his mysterious and unfathomable image, saying with a smile. That was an advance payment. Look, Mr. Chariot, you could have reacted like Mr. Hanged Man instead of just staring and saying nothing. Klein thought with slight annoyance as he looked at Chariot, who was looking at the hanged man with a small smile. Alger, I wonder if you knew that Klein likes to get his boots licked. I'm sure he loved what you said, Adrian thought with a small smile before looking at the fool. What do you mean by Mr. Fool? Do you have a job you'd like us to complete? Adrian asked with false curiosity, and this made Audrey and Alger nod. Audrey asked, Mr. Fool, what do you want us to do? Alger asked more respectfully, what business do you wish to entrust us with? Klein leaned back slightly as he watched the three of them before saying in a soft and pleased voice. Collect Russell Gustav's secret diaries, even if it's only one page. And well done, you fried their brains, Adrian thought with amusement as he watched Alger and Audrey's reactions. They were both taken back for a few moments before processing what the fool had said. Of the two, the one who had the greatest reaction was undoubtedly Alger, since Audrey didn't seem much surprised with what the fool had said. After all, in her eyes, only something like the diary of the great Emperor Russell could interest the powerful figure of Mr. Fool. Diary. Is that a diary? Alger said after noticing that detail. Ads by PubFuture. Facing the hanged man's question and almost getting the expected reaction, Klein leaned back in his chair and interlocked his fingers together. He responded in a relaxed manner. Let's review it as a diary for now. Again being mysterious, Klein. The redhead thought, giving an internal sigh as he saw how Alger was killing his head. Although remembering Flora's reaction, he could admit that there was a certain pleasure in doing this. A small mischievous smile formed on his face. But if we can't understand the symbols or decipher them, how can we pass the information on to you, Mr. Fool? Or do we have to send it you somewhere? Audrey asked doubtfully, and Klein didn't rush to answer but thought about how to solve it. Soon, he had an idea. At that moment, Audrey, Alger and Adrian watched as Mr. Fool was slowly sitting up in the thick gray mist. Miss Justice, let's give it a try. Imagine a paragraph of text and give her the emotions to write it urgently. Yes, pick up the fountain pen next to you and write on a piece of paper. Before Klein finished his sentence, Audrey saw a piece of yellowish-brown parchment goatskin and a dark red fountain pen in front of her. She grabbed the fountain pen with both curiosity and doubt, and according to Mr. Fool's instructions, she imagined a poem by Emperor Russell. After scrutinizing the text, she imbued the fountain pen with the desire to project them. The moment the fountain pen touched the patch, Audrey saw how a line of text appeared on it. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? Goddess, how fascinating, Audrey exclaimed in astonishment as she felt rueful. Following that, she looked at Klein fearfully. Mr. Fool, can you see what I'm thinking? Upon hearing the question, Adrian laughed internally. If he could do that, I would have been discovered by now, he thought calmly as he watched how Klein placated her by saying that he was only guiding her. He also observed how the way to deliver the Russell Emperor's diary would be delivered was confirmed, and also how Alger explained to Audrey what a spectator actually was. At that moment he decided that it was better to say something because he was getting bored just watching. Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice, let me give you some advice on my experience using the acting method. At the moment he spoke, he caught the attention of the three people who looked at him curiously. Acting method? Is that what Mr. Fool described earlier, Mr. Chariot? Audrey asked curiously, and Adrian nodded. He was inside a Sephiroth, so the influence of a contract made by an artifact would have no authority here. Ads by PubFuture. That's the technical name, and it includes the acting rules. These mean the fundamental rules that you found to act as the name of your potion tells you, explained Adrian, and they were all listening intently, memorizing everything the man was saying. You must know that we all have different acting rules, regardless of whether we are the same pathway. If you were to use the rules of other Beyonders in your path, even though the potion may be digested, it will be much slower than if you used your own rules. Take for example sequence 7 of the Seer's Path, called a magician. Although it is different from all magicians, there is a repeating rule, and that is that. When Klein heard that, he was quite surprised. The name of the sequence 7 of his path was magician. This made the corners of his mouth twitch as he had an ugly thought. Seer, magician, I won't end up going through all the circus jobs, will I? The name of my sequence 8 wouldn't be something horrible like a clown, right? I won't have to work in a circus, right? Before Klein could continue worrying about his future, he watched as Mr. Chariot raised his hand and raised one finger. Although the acting rules are different for everyone, there is one that is repeated and must be respected. Adrian's voice was heavy and serious, and this made Audrey swallow her saliva unconsciously, and Klein and Alger straightened up in their chairs. No one noticed what Klein did as they were staring at Adrian. You're just acting. Listening to the universal rule made everyone who heard it quite confused. That you are just acting? What does that mean? Those kinds of thoughts went through the minds of all three, and the first to show her doubt was Audrey again. Mr. Chariot, what does that mean? That? Audrey asked doubtfully. Well done, Miss Justice. Klein thought with relief. He couldn't ask that because it would greatly damage his image, and also because it could mean Mr. Chariot would discover him. Adrian gave a short laugh before answering. You should know that when you are acting, you are tricking the psyche of the potion to merge with you. This psyche comes from the ingredients of the potion, and when you are acting using the acting rules, what you are really doing is acting as the psyche likes. When he said that, the three people who were listening felt a chill go through their bodies. I think you already understand where I'm going, Adrian said with a smile before continuing. The more you act like the potion without respecting the rule of it will slowly influence your personality until you lose yourself entirely. This means that the possibility of losing control increases enormously. Finishing his explanation, Adrian gave a short laugh. But of course, as long as you remember that, you should be fine. The three people who heard the man's explanation couldn't help but feel uncomfortable by the man's laughter. Some more than others. Losing yourself. Even the method of reducing the risk of losing control that Russell wrote in his diary has such great danger. Klein thought heavily, then gave an internal sigh. It seems that nothing in this world is completely safe, thought the figure covered in fog darkly. Audrey was now playing with her fingers as Chariot's words shocked her quite a bit. The idea of losing herself in acting was something she hadn't thought of, but now knowing the risks that could be involved, she could only feel grateful to the man for saying so. She also felt that she had to compensate him for sharing information that was valuable to her. Mr. Chariot, thank you very much for this warning. This information must be valuable, so tell me how much I should pay for it. Adrian chuckled as he shook his head. Audrey is undoubtedly very good, the redhead thought, pleased before speaking. Don't worry, Miss Justice, this is just a help to the Tarot Club, so I won't ask for anything in return, but next time I will ask for payment, the redhead said calmly. The truth is that he wanted to ask for money but decided first to give an image that despite being a bully, he is a good bully. That despite bothering everyone, he still worried about their safety. He wasn't stupid, he knew that if he just kept bothering the members he would only be distancing himself from the club, and that was something he couldn't afford. If he got to an extreme point, he could be kicked out of the club. So better to show some sugar every so many bags of salt. Besides, the last thing I want is to make enemies with the bank of the Tarot Club, thought Adrian seriously as he looked at Audrey. Audrey couldn't help but feel touched by what Chariot said. He may be annoying, but Mr. Chariot has his moments, she thought, slightly changing her image of the man. Before it was that of an old man who loved to tease children with pranks. Now it was that of an old man who, despite bothering the children, later compensated them with sweets. It didn't bother her at all that the man said that he would charge for information later, but she felt it was fair. She never liked receiving things for free and would rather pay for them. As you say, Mr. Chariot, Audrey said as she nodded gracefully. Ads by PubFuture. Alger listened to all the interaction with seriousness, but inside, despite how much he wanted to deny it, he was a little grateful to Chariot. Thanks to his experience, he knew exactly what it was like to lose oneself, he had seen it. Even Chariot revealed quite a bit of information about what the fool said and even added other details. He also noted that he was familiar with what he revealed is called the acting method. Watching the farthest man, he narrowed his eyes. Is Chariot a high-ranking member of the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom? When we first appeared in this space, he was the first to react and notice the figure of Mr. Fool, but after that, he calmed down and even relaxed. With that thought, he narrowed his eyes at the strangely robed figure who, as always, was relaxed in his chair. Is he familiar with Mr. Fool? Is that why he is always so relaxed? While he was thinking that, he saw how Chariot looked back at him. It seemed that he had felt that he was watching him. See something you like, Mr. Hanged Man? Chariot asked flirtatiously, and Alger just looked away as he answered shortly. It's nothing, Mr. Chariot. He could hear the man chuckle, and this made him let out a shaky breath. Klein and Audrey watched this and could only feel bad for the hanged man who was being bullied again. Audrey trying to save the man from being further pestered by Chariot, she decided to change the subject. Mr. Fool, how many diary pages would we have to give you to compensate you for the information you gave us? Klein was taken a bit by surprise by this question, but he still maintained his image as a great existence and answered calmly, as if he was talking to a child. As I mentioned before, I am a person who likes fair and equivalent exchange. The advanced payment that I gave is only equivalent to 2 pages of the diary for each person. If there is more, I will give additional in return. Her move worked wonders because Chariot and Hanged Man kept quiet and listened to what Mr. Fool said. You are truly a generous gentleman, Alger said as he bowed slightly with a hand on his chest. I'll do my best, Mr. Fool, Adrian said as he nodded, but his mind was on something else. My Chinese may be a bit bad, but I can read it without much problem. I just hope that Russell's handwriting isn't as ugly as said, he thought, already judging the Emperor's handwriting. Perhaps Teacher Isengard has some with him, I should write to him about this. Seeing that no one was saying anything else, Alger sighed before saying. It seems that there is nothing else. Maybe we can have a casual chat. We can talk about things that happen around us. It might be something very normal for you, but in the ears of others, it might be an important clue. Sure, Klein said while nodding slightly. Why don't you start, Mr. Hanged Man? Adrian asked Alger, who just nodded. Alger thought for a moment. The infamous pirate who calls himself Lieutenant General Duevil has begun his voyage to explore the eastern end of the Sonia Sea again. Ads by PubFuture. Oh, the owner of the Black Tulip. Audrey returned with a question after thinking. Adrian ignored this because it was useless to him, but suddenly he saw how the fool touched the side of the bronze table. According to what I know, the secret order has lost an Antigonus family notebook. An Antigonus family notebook? Alger repeated before smiling as he shook his head. I'm quite curious what reaction the Church of the Evernight Goddess will have if they find out about that. Why would he mention the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein sensed a problem but couldn't ask about it. That would break his image. But luckily there was Audrey, who asked out of curiosity. Why are you curious? What kind of special reaction will the Church of the Evernight Goddess have? Alger smiled as he said, the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I'm not sure if it happened in the fourth epoch or the early stages of the current epoch. It was at the end of the fourth epoch. Hearing those words, the three people turned their gazes to Chariot, who was smiling. That family is very special because its ancestor and founder was someone who was close to becoming a god but failed. It is said that the ancestor is still alive, but now he is insane and resides on the top of the Hornassus Mountains. Chariot's words made Klein's blood run cold in his veins. Hornassus Mountains. That's what I hear every time I access the gray fog. And what is that about? If it didn't ruin my image, I would jump out of my chair and strangle Chariot and shake him until he tells me everything he knows. Thought very shocked Klein, who could barely maintain his image. He did not expect to receive so much information just by asking a question. Alger was simply stunned. Was that family so powerful? How does Chariot know all that? What kind of position does he have in the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom? As he looked at Chariot, he noticed how he had bright red hair. Trying to remember the books he had to read in the Church of the Lord of Storms about the members of the Church of God of Knowledge and Wisdom, no member had hair that color. Close to becoming a god. That's blasphemy, thought Audrey, stupefied. Mr. Chariot, what does that mean? Asked Audrey, brimming with curiosity. Well done, Miss Justice, Klein thought ecstatically. But his happiness didn't last long because he saw how Chariot turned to see him, and this surprised him. Obviously, Audrey and Alger also noticed this and were surprised and turned to look at the fool, who was unperturbed, and then turned back to Chariot, who chuckled. That's not something you should know right now, the man said calmly, and this upset and took the three people by surprise. Adrian had an idea of how Audrey, Alger, and Klein were feeling. He had thrown them such a juicy lure after all, but in the end, he pulled it out of the water before they bit him. He had left them very close to the climax to finally stop. It's still too early for you guys to know this. After all, I don't want you to turn into soup after leaving here, Adrian thought, amused before saying. That knowledge is dangerous for you to know now, he said calmly, and this confused the three present. Audrey was silent for a moment and then asked doubtfully, Mr. Chariot, can't you tell us why knowledge is dangerous? What does that mean? Seeing that justice was coming to the rescue again, Klein could only internally sigh with relief. Having Miss Justice is a blessing, but I can't go on like this forever. I have to find a way to ask questions without using my identity as the fool, Klein thought seriously, but his thoughts were interrupted when he saw how Chariot nodded. In the Beander world, knowledge is dangerous. If you obtain knowledge without having the strength to bear it, the only thing you will achieve is to be infected. This infection can appear in several forms, but the most common is death, and believe me when I tell you that it is the best case. But one of the worst is that another person will be born inside you. Your actions will be controlled by this person, and you will carry out actions contrary to what you want, to the point that you will only be able to see how you are controlled without being able to do anything, Adrian said calmly, but this only horrified Audrey, who put her hands to her mouth. That's horrible. That even knowledge is dangerous, Audrey murmured with fear. Klein, listening to Justice's words, just nodded internally in agreement. You're right, Miss Justice, that even knowledge is dangerous. This world is much darker than I thought, Klein thought heavily. Hearing Audrey's words, Adrian nodded before saying, the world of the Beander is not rosy, Miss Justice, it is one of madness, darkness, and pain. And the further you go into it, you will only find more suffering, so let me ask you. Are you sure you want to become a Beander? Audrey, listening to Chariot's question, only remained silent for a few moments before answering seriously. I already knew that the world that I am going to enter is dangerous, and by continuing to participate in this meeting it is because I am sure of my decision and there is nothing that will make me change my mind. Hearing Audrey's words, Adrian just nodded. If that is your wish, Miss Justice, I won't say anything else, he said calmly. So deluded and innocent, the redhead thought as he shook his head internally. Ads by PubFuture. He's sure he'll be able to change Audrey's mind if he wanted to, but he's not going to. The reason is quite simple. Audrey is Klein's psychiatrist, he thought seriously as he looked at the woman. If he stopped her from becoming a Beander, all he would do was damage and endanger Klein's future mental state. Feeling that changing the subject would be the best option, he spoke again. What about you, Miss Justice? Is there something interesting in your life? Audrey was silent for a few seconds thinking about what to answer. My etiquette teacher taught me how to pass out gracefully without any faux pas. It's a practical skill used in social events to avoid awkward situations or nasty guys. I was just organizing my thoughts. What I want to say is that since the failure in the battle on the east coast of Balam, the king, premier, and the gentlemen are under immense stress. They eagerly wish to change. They believe that the government situation is too chaotic. Every election, if there is a change of the ruling party, there will be a change of personnel from the top to the bottom. It makes things messy and lowers efficiency tremendously. It not only brings the battle lost, but also brings great inconvenience to civilians. Hearing Audrey's words, Adrian just settled into his place, showing no interest in politics. I always hated everything related to politics. Always when there was an election period, it was not uncommon to get paid to vote for certain candidates. Sorry, Miss Audrey, but this is not an issue that I control. While he watched as Alger showed his displeasure with his superiors, he also saw how Mr. Fool touched the bronze table, drawing the attention of the other two. This made him nod silently, pleased. At least here there is someone who does. Klein gently tapped the bronze table, drawing the attention of the three people. This has a simple solution. An examination, such as a college entrance exam. Hold an exam that is open to the public. It can be divided into 2 or 3 rounds. Use the most objective system to select the elite. After that, use those elites to fill the positions of the cabinet, the county government, the city government, and the various towns. The positions that are directly handling affairs, such as the cabinet secretary. Different positions should have different requirements. The second and third rounds can be taken depending on the location and region. Professional problems should be left to the professionals. And for political positions like ministers, governors, or mayors, that will be left to the party that won the election. After all, that is a piece of the pie that they earned. There is no rush to replace all of them at once. The cabinet and various agencies in the civil service will be crippled if that happens. You can have a review every year or every 3 years. Finally, in light of the kingdom's expansion and the salaried civil servant resignations that are going to bring vacancies, you can systematically allocate positions. Klein finished his explanation while lowering his hand with a slight smile. Ads by PubFuture. Regardless of which party is in power or who the minister is, the civil service will enable the kingdom to maintain its basic and effective operation. And this will help George III with his ritual, thought Adrian flat-faced. Audrey repeated what Mr. Fool had said in her head, then said in surprise. This sounds like it might actually work. She looked at the covered Klein in wonder. Mr. Fool, you must be an elderly person with outstanding intelligence who is very experienced in life. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, and this intensified when he heard how Chariot was chuckling softly. He is barely 22 years old, Audrey. For an Asian to call them old is the equivalent of a strong insult. You don't even know it, but you provoked Mr. Fool. You have talent as a provoker, Audrey, thought Adrian proud, but after a few moments, he fell silent when he recorded a detail. Although in theory, he really is thousands of years old. Let's end the meeting here, the Fool said after looking at the figures of Justice, the Hanged Man and Chariot, who got up from their seats. By your will. Klein watched as the illusory and blurred figures of the Tarot Club members immediately fragmented and dissipated. Now he was left alone in the palace of giants in which it seemed that the gods lived. Leaning back slightly on his seat of honor, he gently began to tap the bronze table while recalling today's winnings. Opening his red eyes back in his dirty room, Adrian got up while scratching his eyes, pretending that he just got up from a good nap. How are you, Flora? Did you sleep well? He asked as he took hangover time out of his pocket and opened the pocket watch. Your naps are short. The pathways that enhance the body are quite useful in that regard, Flora spoke calmly, and Adrian nodded. Yes, but we sacrifice the mysterious side to achieve that, he replied as he went to his bag and opened it. You're right, the hunter's pathway is one of the mysteriously weak ones, she said, and in her voice, you could notice the slight touch of provocation. And now I have you to solve that, countered the redhead, and Flora snorted. Now what are you going to do? Are you going to the circus to scare children with that ugly mask? Adrian chuckled as he stuffed his mask into a bag along with a black jacket and a strange windbreaker. Well, you can say that I'm going to scare a few adults, Mommy. Mommy, how long until we get there? Said a child excitedly as he jumped in his walk while holding the hand of his mother who smiled at him. Calm down, sweetheart. As soon as we turn this corner you will be able to see it, the woman said as she tried to calm down the child. But I want to see Funky Wonky. The child said with emotion and the mother only let out a sigh. The father who was standing next to them could only chuckle softly as he shook his head. Will, you behave yourself or there won't be ice cream later, the man threatened gently but sternly. Will's jumping stopped and he even straightened his back and walked calmly. As you say, father, the boy said serenely, but there was still some barely contained emotion in his tone. The mother and father looked at each other for a moment before bursting out laughing. Will ignored that and kept his pace even. You don't play with ice cream. They finally reached the end of the street and turned the corner. They could see how several families were heading in the same direction as them. The children of the families were overwhelmed and seemed to drag their parents to hurry. At the end of the street was a good-sized park, but in the middle of it were huge tents with red and white straps. In front of these, set to one side was a large sign. In front of this sign were several people dressed in exaggerated, pastel-colored clothing, with hats with bells, their faces painted white, their eyes circled blue, and their noses painted bright red. Clowns. Will said happily and his parents giggled. Would you like to go with the clowns before going in, Will? The mother asked lovingly and Will nodded energetically with a big toothy smile. Then let's go, said the father with a smile, and thus they approached the clowns who were already surrounded by children. Joe, welcome children to the Funky Clown Show, 5 clowns sang in unison. I am Wanky, chanted one with the red hat. I am Wenky, sang another with the yellow hat. I am Winky, sang the one with the green hat. I am Wonky, sang the one with the brown hat. And I am Wunky, sang the last one with a big smile on his face and with a blue hat that highlighted his blue eyes. And together we are the Funky Clowns, they all sang together and the kids who were there laughed out loud including Will. Tell me kids, what would you like to see? The clowns asked at the same time. A funky trick, the kids yelled and the clowns nodded exaggeratedly as if they suddenly had a heavy heads. Say, kids, what kind of trick would you like to see? A Wunky trick, the children shouted with excitement and the wonky clown just laughed out loud. Looks like I'm the favorite again. Sorry bros, but the kids love me, Wonky said with exaggerated sadness as he wiped a fake tear. But while he was wiping away the tears, letters suddenly appeared between his fingers. Well kids, Wonky sang humorously as he lowered his arm with the cards and raised another in which another deck of cards appeared between his fingers. The remaining 4 clowns quickly grabbed buckets from their sides and moved to some lucky kids and handed out balloons filled with something. Will was one of the lucky ones and he held up his balloon with a sharp smile. You're ready for a wonky trick? The blue-eyed clown said with a huge smile. Ads by PubFuture. Yes, Funky Wunky, everyone yelled, even the clowns who had pushed everyone back to leave a big space where Wonky was in the middle. Then throw them on my mark. Wonky yelled and the children raised their arms. 3. While saying the number, Wonky opened his left hand revealing that the cards had disappeared and that now only a long bandage remained, and this caused the children to gasp in surprise. To make it fairer I won't see anything, Wonky said, and he blindfolded himself. Suddenly he extended his left hand and the cards that had disappeared returned. 2. 1. Now. When he yelled that, the lucky kids and the clowns released their respective balloons and Wonky kept his smile. He did an acrobatic jump while doing multiple spins and threw the cards that hit the balloons, making them explode without the paint touching him. When his feet touched the floor he spread his arms out in AY, still blindfolded but completely clean. The paint had formed a U around him, but before he could speak a balloon that had been thrown too high fell and hit him square in the face. The balloon exploded on impact and covered him in paint. Because he was smiling, the paint went into his mouth and he began to cough. This made all the children and adults who were there laugh out loud, and the clowns looked at what happened in astonishment. Wanky approached a shocked Wanky who had her mouth hanging down. Hey Susan, this is the first time someone hit Nathan, right? He whispered in her ear and the woman just nodded, still stunned. It's the first time since he got here, the woman answered in a low voice, but then they both heard the shout of a child near them. "Mommy, I hit Wonky. You saw, Will yelled excitedly and his mother hugged him. "That was a great throw, sweetheart," the woman said fondly, and the father tossed Will's hair with a proud smile. Wonky, after a few moments of surprises, let out a big laugh as he approached Will. "Great job, champ. It's the first time someone has done it, and for that you deserve something as a gift." He still had orange paint on his face, but he held out both hands in front of Will, who watched this still laughing. Then he turned them over, showing that there was nothing, but when he turned them over again, a deck of cards appeared. He squatted in front of Will and then he began to mix the cards quickly and with great mastery, doing various tricks, making Will laugh more. After doing all that, he held the deck in his right palm in front of Will and his left palm was next to it. "Now you have to cut it," Wonky said with a wink, and Will nodded. The boy cut the deck in half, placing one half in his left hand. He grabbed the other half and placed it on top. Wonky nodded to this and said, "Now draw a card and you can take it with you. It's my private collection, so take good care of it," he said with a small smile, and Will nodded and grabbed the top card of the deck. He turned it over. In the middle of the card shows a giant wheel, with 3 figures on the outer edges. This wheel has the alchemical symbols for mercury, sulfuric, water and salt. At the bottom was written. It seemed to be upside down. Wonky observed this curiously and said, "This is a tarot card invented by Emperor Russell. This card is called Wheel of Fortune and now it is upside down. That means your luck and fortune may take a turn for the worst. You may experience unexpected change or negative forces could be at play." Ads by PubFuture. You have a choice. You can do nothing and hope things will get better, or you can act to improve your situation. See this moment as your opportunity to take control of your destiny and get your life back on track. Wonky said calmly before giggling. "This was a free divination. Remember to take care of the card for me, champ," Wonky said as he patted Will's shoulder, who now had a small smile but his black eyes seemed deeper. Will looked up and nodded as he put the letter away. "I will, Mr. Wonky. This also fell near me when you threw the cards. I would like to return it," the boy said with a smile as he took a card out of his pocket and handed it to Wonky, who received it with a smile. "Thank you very much, champ. You should know that finding these cards after a trick is seriously annoying. You saved me from finding this one," Wonky said gratefully as he shook Will's hair, who chuckled. "Anytime, Mr. Wonky, have a nice day," the boy said as he took his mom's hand and they entered the red and white tent. Wonky watched this with a smile and looked down at the card Will gave him. He was quite surprised because this was not a card that he used. He used poker cards. He looked again at the path where the boy who gave him the card went before sighing. He turned to look at Wanky and Wanky. "I'm going to clean the paint off. I'll see you guys later," he yelled, and they both nodded. Wonky turned and walked to a smaller tent set back from the big one for more privacy. He entered while taking off his blue hat, revealing his black hair. He grabbed a thermos that was filled with water along with a handkerchief. He went to sit in front of a mirror and, wetting his handkerchief with water, he wiped his face, cleaning the orange paint. "Luckily the paint we used to fill the balloons is easy to remove," said Wonky, relieved as he wet the handkerchief again and wiped it over his face. After a while of cleaning his face, he was finally free of paint. He looked at his face in the mirror, checking that he hadn't missed anything. Verifying that he had not forgotten anything, he only sighed. "How could that boy hit me? My clown intuition helps me even dodge attacks much faster. Was it luck?" thought the blue eye, and then sighed in shame. "When Sasha finds out about this, she won't make me forget it," he mumbled, embarrassed while scratching his neck. "What the boss wrote in his letter is much more difficult than I thought. Discovering the is complicated. If I didn't feel that feeling of that he mentioned in the letter, I would think he was lying," he thought seriously. When the boss left their house without saying goodbye, he had left a letter that explained something called the, and also had written various works that they could try to discover the. Sasha had gone to fight in the arena below Braveheart's bar, and he had gone to the circus. It had taken him a long time, and he only managed to figure out one rule. It is because of this rule that he had continued with the work in the circus, because in no other place could he try to act without attracting attention. Sighing again, he took out the letter that boy gave him. This was also a tarot card. It was the image of a man with a mustache holding the jaws of a lion. This was the card, and it was upright. The nights at Braveheart's bar were quite interesting. On one side were the drunkards who drank cheap alcohol until they lost control of their bladders. And on the other, lesser known side, were the people who wanted to see blood, and the rats' fights weren't enough to satisfy that. So in the basement of the bar, they held a tournament where they could see exactly that. Men break their bones with blows for the desire to win a juicy prize or simply return the money they borrowed from the old man. Normally there were only men in these fights due to various reasons, but recently that changed. Standing on a makeshift arena was a man in his 30s, dressed in a white shirt and black gloves. "Welcome to this night of carnage," he screamed with a loud voice, and all the people who were there screamed. "Let it begin now. Let Skullcracker out. I want to see the lunatic break that bitch." Hearing the screams, the presenter just smiled with emotion and said, "After the last fights, we have seen how Skullcracker has climbed the ranks to become the second best. And now it's finally time for the two beasts to face each other to see who is the best." He shouted, and the public shouted yes. The announcer raised his right arm and pointed to a corner of the arena where a figure was sitting. On the right side, we have the famous and hated lunatic. Weighing more than 150 kilos and measuring 1.95 meters, this monster has more than 60 fights won by KO. Upon being introduced, Lunatic got up and hit his chest like a monkey. He was a slightly tanned man, with short brown hair and black eyes. He was quite muscular and wore no shirt or shoes, just short brown pants. "Your luck ran out, bitch. Now it's your turn to face me." Lunatic yelled at a figure sitting on the other end, and the audience screamed at that. The announcer now raised his left arm and pointed at that figure. And on the left side, we have the powerful and brutal Skullcracker. Measuring over 1.95 meters and with an unknown weight, this rookie has more than 20 undefeated fights, and all of them won by KO. Most of her opponents have ended with a broken bone. The seated figure rose. Because of the body, it was a woman. She was wearing a short shirt to cover her breasts along with short pants. She was not wearing shoes either. A curiosity about this woman is that she wore a mask that covered her entire head except for her eyes and mouth. "Just don't break so easily, will you, asshole?" Skullcracker said with a smile, and the lunatic growled, "I'm going to fuck you up, bitch." Skullcracker laughed at the lunatic's threat. She then turned to look at the announcer. "Are you going to start it or what?" she said with annoyance, and the presenter laughed awkwardly. "May the best fighter win," yelled while blowing a whistle, starting the fight. As in all the previous fights that Lunatic had, he rushed toward his opponent with speed. He tried to grab the legs of Skullcracker, who jumped to the side, causing the lunatic to pass her. She didn't miss the opportunity, but taking advantage of the man's back is turned, she wrapped her arms around the man's stomach and suplexed him, slamming him hard to the floor. Ads by PubFuture. This caused the public to scream with excitement. This stunned Lunatic a lot, but he managed to get up. For his success, he received a knee to the face that broke his nose. Before he could recover, this was followed by a quick left and right jab combo along with several quick jabs to the stomach. Strangely, he was still standing, but his condition was bad. His right eye had become very swollen and his nose was bent. His face was also quite swollen and several parts of his torso had red and purple marks. "Bitch," the lunatic said weakly, and Skullcracker laughed at this. "What's up, buddy? You weren't going to fuck me up," the woman said with a laugh, and this made the public scream with emotion. This also touched the pride of Lunatic, who angrily tried to attack the woman again. This time he didn't make the same movement but tried to kick the woman, who received him directly on her right side. This blow had broken the ribs of all his previous opponents, and this made confidence fill him. The lunatic smirked at this, but this didn't last long because Skullcracker wrapped her right arm around the leg, blocking it and not allowing it to move away. Before he could process what was happening, the woman's left hand wrapped around his neck and she lifted him into the air before slamming him hard to the ground. This time she didn't allow him to get up, but sitting on top of Lunatic, she began to rain down blows on his face. The man tried to cover himself as he could by raising his arms, but Skullbreaker only grabbed one and moved it away so that her blow connected firmly against his face. This continued like this until he could no longer defend himself and his arms fell, and the Skullcracker stopped at that moment. Her knuckles were covered in the man's blood and she turned away from the man, allowing the announcer to kneel beside the lunatic and place his ear on his chest. Listening to the weak heartbeat, he only sighed and then got up. Approaching Skullcracker's side, he grabbed her right arm, which had some blood on it. "The lunatic is unconscious, so we have a new champion," the man yelled loudly, and the audience screamed with great emotion. "Our new champion is Skullbreaker," he yelled as he raised the woman's arm, and the audience exploded again. "Yes, I win the bet." That is a show. You fucked him up skullcracker. Skullcracker listened to all this with a big smile as she raised her other arm. She could feel something inside her melting slowly and this made her smile grow. Wiping the blood from her hands she couldn't help but sigh. That feeling is something strange, I've felt it before but never knew what it meant. Turns out it was because my potion was. After cleaning up all the blood and collecting the prize, she left Braveheart's bar using dark alleys so as not to attract attention for wearing a mask. Sensing that it was already safe, she took off her mask, revealing her face along with her orange-yellow hair that broke free and fell down her back. Returning to her house, she smelled the smell of food and couldn't help but smile. Going to the kitchen she ran into the sight of Nathan who was in an apron cooking something in a pan. Ads by PubFuture. How did your match go, Sasha? He asked calmly and without looking back as he added some salt. She just smiled in defeat as she walked over to Nathan and hugged him from behind. Due to the difference in height between the two of them, which was almost a head, she was able to place her chin on top of Nathan's hair, who didn't show a change in his expression but let out a small smile. The guy had a good kick but that's it, I totally wrecked him, Sasha said proudly and Nathan chuckled softly. I'm sure you did, he said as he stirred the soup, and Sasha looked curiously at what he was cooking. That's not the soup you usually cook, what is it? It's a recipe that the boss gave me when he stayed here, he said it was called. It's my first time doing it but it seems to be going well, Nathan explained and Sasha nodded already feeling hungry. The boss's food can be weird but it was always delicious, Sasha said with a smile but suddenly she remembered something. Hey, you still haven't told me how it was at the circus, Sasha asked curiously as she rested her cheek on Nathan's hair who used his ability as a clown to control his face. You see. Nathan said a little uncomfortable and Sasha listened carefully. A loud laugh was heard inside the house. Nathan just turned red with embarrassment as he felt how Sasha trembled with laughter. Are you telling me that a child managed to hit you? Oh, Nathan, that's amazing. Sasha chuckled and Nathan only turned redder. In my defense, that boy is quite strange. After giving him a free divination he gave me a card saying it was mine but he actually gave me a tarot card, Nathan said but listening to his words Sasha narrowed her eyes. What do you mean with that? Nathan shook his head at Sasha's question. I already made multiple divinations, that boy is normal, just a little strange, maybe he likes to play with those cards, that's why he had one and he gave it to me as a joke, he said as he took the tarot card out of his pocket and showed it to Sasha who looked at it. Huh, she said more calmly and Nathan nodded. He gave it to me upright, and that means that you have inner strength and fortitude during moments of danger and distress. It shows that you have the ability to remain calm and strong even when your life is going through immense struggle. Nathan explained and Sasha nodded. Well, it seems to be an accurate description because you're like that, she said with a smile as she used a little more force in her hug. Thanks for the word, Sasha, Nathan said with a smile as he grabbed the woman's head and pulled her closer to give her a short kiss on the lips. This made Sasha have a goofy smile. Why do you still have the card? She asked as she lowered her head and kissed Nathan's neck who let out a little moan. There was no harm in keeping it, plus it might bring luck, Nathan blurted out as Sasha shoved her hands under his shirt. Oh, and why is that? She said flirtatiously as she caressed Nathan's abdomen and licked his neck causing him to moan louder. Clown's intuition, Nathan said weakly. Hey, wait until the food is over at least, the blue-eyed man said blushing when he felt how the woman's hands went down to his underwear. Just a quick one, Sasha whispered in Nathan's ear who nodded. Okay, a quick one. Opening his eyes after 4 hours of sleep and listening to the sound of the streets, Adrian could only sigh. Nothing, he murmured as he looked at the ceiling of his room. He had spent all day yesterday looking for any clues regarding the cops who escaped but he had gotten nothing. You know, finding someone is not as easy as it seems, said Flora and the redhead just nodded. Getting up from his bed he changed and dressed in the worker's clothes. Wrapping the bandages around his hands, he fixed his hair and put on his hat. Hunching over, he left his room and through the dirty hotel corridor, he went downstairs to the ground floor where he bumped into the old man from earlier who was playing cards with other younger men. This old man ignored him while playing but the other men didn't. They glared at him and Adrian pretended to shake with fear and got out of there as quickly as he could. He could hear the loud laughter of those men and this made him sigh. When I get out of here, you'll be the first to die, the redhead thought as he remembered the faces of the men. With those thoughts he kept walking, accompanying a crowd of workers who were on their way to work in the factories. These workers had dead looks in their eyes. Adrian didn't stay in this crowd for long, but when he got to a specific alley, he entered it being ignored by the workers. He advanced a little more until he was sure he would not be seen. Straightening his back, he took a great leap, grabbing onto a pipe in the wall and climbing up to the roof of the building. Already there he approached a bag that he had placed there and grabbed it. Placing it on his shoulder, he ran across the rooftops unseen by the people below. He continued like this until the limits of the East Borough. Going down an empty alley, he opened the bag, revealing his clothes as homes. Braveheart's bar. In the poker room, as always, Marich was playing cards with his zombies and the old man was playing billiards with other zombies. Hitting a red ball and seeing how it didn't fall into the hole, the old man just sighed as he waited for the zombie to take his turn. "I'm sorry to bother you gentlemen, but I'd like to talk to you," but before the zombie could make his move they all heard a voice. Marich turned his head and saw how Adrian was in the shadows. The man had his face uncovered but had the hood of his windbreaker pulled up to hide his hair. The old man was surprised for a moment, but seeing the familiar face he only sighed exasperatedly. "Brat," the old man said, surprised, but all he received was Adrian's icy gaze that made him freeze. Marich narrowed his eyes as he watched the man. Ads by PubFuture. "So you're alive," Adrian snorted as he answered. "Thanks to your friend I'm almost not." This confused Marich a bit, but Adrian ignored the man and turned his gaze to the old man. "I want my letters," he said seriously, and the old man nodded uncomfortably. "This time there are 3 inches. Adrian nodded as he handed the money to the old man and grabbed the letters that had different stamps. "I want to talk to Marich alone." The old man moved his eyes slightly to Marich, who nodded. The old man nodded and left the room. Now only Adrian, Marich and his zombies remained. Adrian listened as the old man's footsteps moved further away, and when he finally got far enough, he spoke. "I also want to talk to Sharon." Marich wasn't surprised by the man's words, but he didn't say anything. This caused both of them to fall silent and stare at each other. "What do you want to talk about?" A woman's voice sounded from the side. Turning his gaze, Adrian saw how a woman was sitting on a chair. She is a young woman with a pale face, blonde hair, blue eyes, and delicate features. She was wearing a black Gothic royal dress and a soft hat. Adrian nodded slightly. From Marich's words, "I must assume that what happened in my house was already in the newspapers," Adrian said calmly, and Sharon nodded gently. "They wrote that the gas pipes had a malfunction and this caused an explosion. Your whereabouts are unknown, but there were witnesses who say they saw a man carry a burned body," said Marich, and Adrian nodded, internally surprised. "So that bitch survived, huh?" His words made Marich and Sharon raise an eyebrow. "Why did you ask to speak to me?" Sharon asked, her voice flat with no emotion. "She really does look like a doll, in looks and voice," Adrian thought as he replied. "Your friend Steve attacked me last night." Marich's eyes widened in surprise, and Sharon only looked up slightly, showing her surprise. "I'm sure he suspects that I know where you are hiding and he's looking for me to verify his suspicions." Marich's eyes turned cold and his malice grew, but this only lasted a moment and the coldness left them and the malice in them lessened. "Are you looking for protection?" Marich asked, and Adrian shook his head. Ads by PubFuture. "I can defend myself. If I escape from him once, I can do it again. I only came here to let you know that it is very possible that he will receive reinforcements soon." "We already know that," Sharon replied calmly. "Maybe you have 2 or 3 months before you are discovered." Sharon again nodded, and Adrian sighed. "It seems they have it under control for now. But maybe that will change soon. I remember they needed money in Klein's story. That's why Sharon accepted the protection job," Adrian thought seriously. "I'll only come here a few more times to avoid bringing too much attention. If you need help next time I come, I'll give you a method to contact me," he said as he put the burnt band on his arm. "Besides, if you plan to attack Steve, count on me. I really like that house," Adrian said with a smile as he winked at them. "We'll keep you in mind," Sharon replied with a nod, and Marich looked at her. Adrian didn't say anything else and just walked into the shadows of the room and disappeared in them, leaving the 2 Beyonders alone. "Why don't we accept his help? Adrian already managed to escape from Steve. That shows that he's capable," and now he's alone with no companions. There's no better time to attack him, Marich asked doubtfully, but Sharon shook her head softly. It's not the right time yet. If we attack him now, we could bring more trouble upon ourselves, Sharon explained as she disappeared from her place, leaving Marich alone. Marich just sighed as he grabbed his cards and continued his game with the zombies. He trusted Sharon's judgment. Appearing at the back of the bar, Adrian sighed as he pulled his mask over his face. You seem a bit disappointed, Flora said curiously. It's nothing, it's just that I expected something more, replied the redhead as he took the letters out of his jacket. He looked at them for a few moments and a thought came to his head. Maybe it's time to get a messenger, that would solve several problems and prevent me from putting Isengard, Marich and Sharon at unnecessary risk, maybe the old man too, thought Adrian seriously as he opened the letters. The first ones that he opened were those with the red seal, since these were those of Glaint. In total there were 2 letters from him. Reading the first one he couldn't help but chuckle. It seems that he still can't get the apothecary formula, even when I told him where to get it, the redhead thought disappointedly. The next letter from the man had nothing special, he just asked if he knew of another Beander gathering where he could try his luck. Adrian knew of another one, but he was not going to tell the nobleman. It was too dangerous for him to attend and he was not willing to try his luck with Mr. A. The next letter he opened was the one with the yellow seal. Beneath his mask, his eyes turned cold. The yellow seal was the way he had told Zio to use to know that the letter was from her. It seemed that today he would finally get information about those policemen. Ads by PubFuture. Mr. Holmes _ Reading the first sentence, Adrian couldn't help but notice Zio's handwriting. It may have been a while since she was a noble, but without a doubt, her handwriting is the second most beautiful I've ever seen, the redhead praised sincerely. Not wanting to waste time on it, he continued reading the letter. Mr. Holmes. It's been a while since I've been tasked with investigating those policemen and I must say my informants have been busy. Although it was difficult, we have confirmed your suspicion that these policemen are in the East Borough. So far we have only confirmed the area of activity of one of them. Clark Down is hidden in the fishing area of East Borough. He has been seen to have multiple contacts with some members of the Zemanger gang, we do not know the reason for this. He prowls the areas near the warehouses with a group of 3 people, it is confirmed that they are all armed with revolvers and knives. Further down this letter is information about the men who have been seen around Clark. So far he seems to have no plans to leave the East Borough. I will continue investigating to obtain more information on the remaining 3. Zio_. He read the letter 2 more times to memorize it and when he did that, he completely burned the letter letting the ashes fly away. Clark Down. Fishing area, the redhead thought seriously. The fishing area is one of the areas where more kidnappings occur in the East Borough. He remembered the appearances of those policemen quite well, so now that he knew where to look it was just a matter of time to find them. East Borough was too big to search for him to search the entire borough alone. But now the search had been greatly shrunk. He hadn't noticed, but a predatory smile formed on his face. His canines would be easily seen if it weren't for his mask and his red eyes were shining. Flora also read the letter and raised a curious eyebrow. What would this idiot have to do with the police? Hey idiot, why are you looking for those policemen, do they owe you money? She asked without much hope of receiving an answer. Hee, it's not that Flora, it's that these idiots know something that I want. The man's voice was sweet but Flora could sense the poison dripping from each word. So it's like that huh? Flora said without importance but she was looking at Adrian. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian just walked calmly towards the East Borough. His destination now was the fishing area. The fishing area, as its name suggests, is the area where everything related to business with fish happens. As a consequence of this area is one of the worst smelling areas in all of Backland. The warehouses are where the smell is strongest, but it is also where the pay is the best. For this reason, any position related to the warehouses is coveted and desired. The afternoon in this area was when the smell was worst. Lighting a cigarette and taking a puff as he walked, he used his towel to wipe the sweat from his face before exhaling. Arriving at a large warehouse, he could only grunt as he saw how workers were sitting and resting. Get your ass, those boxes have to be shipped in a few hours, he yelled as he kicked a worker who was sitting down. Right away boss. the man said painfully as he got up and helped the other men move the various boxes. Why do they entrust me with these dirty jobs when the new guy got something good? Seeing everyone, he just growled with hate, and this made the workers move faster. 8 years here and nothing, and the new boy gets to work in the cave, the man thought hatefully as he gripped his towel tightly. That was the best illegal brothel in the eastern part of the East Borough. One could even get 14-year-old girls there at a cheap price. Watching as more and more boxes arrived, he growled loudly as he wiped the sweat from his face. Get your ass off or you're fired, he yelled angrily, but he heard a chuckle behind him. Calm down, Benson, it looks like a vein is going to explode. Hearing the familiar voice, the one called Benson had to calm down first before turning around with a smile. Rigby, it's nice to have you here. Tell me what you need, he asked confidently as he extended his hand to Rigby, who looked at it in disgust because Benson's hand was full of dirt and oil. Rigby was a man who looked to be around 30, he had swirling brown hair and brown eyes, a normal face, but compared to Benson he was handsome. Benson was a man in his late 50s, obese, and always seemed to be sweating. Due to working in warehouses, he had a permanent fishy odor. Tonight there's a new shipment from Port 6, call the others. Hearing Rigby's words, Benson nodded, his smile fading. I'll go for the others, the man said seriously, and Rigby nodded. Go, I'll take care of here for now. Benson turned and strolled out of the warehouse, using his towel to wipe off his sweat. The afternoon in this part of the East Borough was quite dark, and the poor lighting only made this worse. Benson was a well-known man in this area, so he didn't have to worry about this. Everyone knew who was behind him and no one would dare touch him, so he was calm. Ads by PubFuture. He never noticed how a hooded figure was looking at him from the darkness of an alley. Benson, Daddy, you're not coming home today, a girl said coquettishly as she hugged Benson's arm. She couldn't be older than 15. The old man's eyes were lustful, but he barely contained himself and with some force separated his arm from the girl's grasp. Not now, Margaret. I'm busy, the man cut cold, but this did not discourage the girl, but she smiled mischievously. She slowly removed a part of her tight dress, showing a bit of breast, and this made Benson's tongue feel dry. I'll give you a special promotion, Daddy, the girl said as she rearranged her dress and walked towards an alley with a sway of her hips that mesmerized Benson. The man let out a loud laugh and followed the girl. After all, there was still time until 6 p.m., he could afford some fun. Didn't you have enough last time, Margaret? And even though you resisted, ha ha ha, I knew you were acting, the man said arrogantly as he entered the alley following the girl, who didn't say anything. This reminds me of that time. In fact, I think it was in a similar alley, the man said, looking at the dirty walls of the alley, but again Margaret said nothing. This is not the way to your house, Margaret. When he turned his gaze back to the girl, he saw how she had disappeared. Margaret, where are you? The man shouted angrily. He looking for me, Daddy, a male voice sounded behind him, and this startled Benson. He reached into his pants trying to get something out, but his arm was stopped by a gloved hand. Before he could scream, a gloved hand clamped down on his mouth and he could see in terror a man with a gloomy mask. Let's talk a little, Daddy, there are many things I want to know, the man said provocatively, and Benson could only scream in pain as he felt his arm slowly break under the man's iron grip. His vision was clouded, but he could still see in terror the man who had tortured him. His arms were bent at odd angles and he had several burns of varying degrees all over his body. Thanks for everything, but now I have to talk to Rigby. Margaret, he is all yours, said the masked man with a dark voice, kicking him around, allowing him to see how Margaret approached him with her eyes wide open and crying rivers of tears. Help me, the man begged in a low voice, but he saw how the girl had a large knife in her hands. What are you doing, Margaret? Benson asked, horrified as he tried to drag himself away from the girl as best he could, but his broken arms didn't help. You killed my sister in front of me after playing with her, the girl said in a low voice as she gripped the knife tightly. Wait, Margaret, let's talk about this, the man said with mounting horror. And then you had your way with me, the girl said with barely contained fury as she stomped on the leg of the man who was screaming in horror. And you did it in this alley, you son of a bitch. Margaret yelled angrily as she plunged the knife into the man's crotch, who screamed in pain. Please me mercy, the man begged tearfully, but only received that Margaret twisted the knife, causing him to scream. I'm going to take my time with you like you did with my sister and me, you son of a bitch, she yelled as she took out the knife and plunged it back into Benson's penis, who screamed again in pain. The figure of the masked man had disappeared at some point. Watching as Margaret slowly mutilated Benson, Adrian's expression under his mask was a cold one. Helping a girl exact her revenge on the one who wronged her. I didn't see you as a white knight, Adrian, Flora said mockingly. The redhead gently shook his head as he said, I'm not, it was just luck that she wanted to kill Benson. Thanks to the profile Zio had gotten, he knew the man's personality was normally dominated by lust. That's why the moment he found out which way he was going, he found a street girl to help him. Remembering how he had approached the girl to pay her £2 to lead Benson into an alley, she only said that she would do that if she could hurt him. At first, he had been suspicious of the girl, but after listening to her reasons, he simply let it go. Watching from the roof of the building next to the alley as she cut off the member of the man who was still alive, he just turned around and started his way towards Port 6. According to the information of the man who had sung like a goose, the cargo would arrive in an hour. Scratching his head and looking around, Rigby's annoyance was clear and a vein was throbbing in his neck. Around him several armed men guarded the entrance to Port 6, keeping unwanted eyes away. Where is that idiot? The cargo will be here any minute. His anxiety was clear, looking at the mist that covered the water. Port 6 was one of several ports where the cargo was received, since the afternoon fog helped to hide the arrival of the ships. Looking around him, he saw how a large group of people came running towards him in the distance. This made his annoyance calm down a bit, but he didn't see Benson in the group. I sent Benson to go get you an hour ago, you better tell me why I had to send someone else to look for you, he asked furiously when the group arrived in front of him, all breathing heavily from running so much. The one who answered was a black-haired man with an unkempt, uneven beard. His mustache barely had any hair. He had been the one Rigby had sent to bring the others. Mr. Rigby, Benson never showed up. No one has seen him. The fear was clear in his voice and Rigby frowned angrily. Again, that animal not only can't control its bladder but also can't do simple work. While he was yelling at the men, a bird was watching them as it flew in the sky. The eyes of this bird were reddish-orange. In the City of Calamities. Looking at the holographic image, Adrian narrowed his eyes. 21 armed men, they walk in trios and their patterns are simple. I could sneak in now, but I can't risk it. According to that fat guy, the will bring more guards and arrive at any moment. I have to wait a little longer. Also, using his index finger, he tapped his left palm twice and activated his spiritual vision. Almost everyone now had transparent and turbulent auras around them. Looks like Clark was busy, he thought, looking at Rigby. Rigby, or as he was originally known, Clark Down, had a purple aura with pink undertones. He became a Beyander. It seems that the demoness sect pays very well. Poor idiot, it seems that he drank an assassin potion, the redhead thought, laughing. I want to see your face knowing that you will become a woman when you reach sequence 7. Ads by PubFuture. But you won't see that day, Adrian thought darkly. As he was planning how he would talk to Clark, he saw a ship approaching through the mist. It was a simple pirate ship, painted in dark colors for better concealment. Several people were working on the deck. Thanks to his spiritual vision being activated, he could see how most of them were normal people. There were also some Beyonders on the deck. Most had an aura of light in dark blue colors, resembling waves and storms. But the strongest was a figure that was looking at Clark. This figure was a woman, very beautiful and with a heroic vibe. Her eyelashes are long and straight, she has sharp, bright blue eyes and beautiful black hair that is coiled up high. This woman's aura was similar to Clark's but much stronger. If they were compared, it seemed as if one placed a poorly painted purple stone next to an amethyst. Seeing this figure, Adrian's eyes widened. He recognized this woman from the descriptions in Klein's story. Impossible. What is Tracy doing here? He couldn't help but say out loud. Pirate Admiral Tracy, youngest daughter of Katerina Pell, the Saintess of White of the Demoness sect, she was sequence 5. What the fuck is she doing here? Doesn't she have a more important place to be? My luck can't be that horrible. The redhead screamed incredulously. His entire plan was ruined. As he watched Tracy's ship slowly approach the port, Adrian tried to think of a reason why she would be here. His eyes lit up for a moment and a detail came to mind. How could I forget that? Tracy isn't an admiral pirate yet because Quilongos is still alive. She may have the strength, but she only gained the title of Pirate Admiral after Quilongos died and she took his crew. She was also involved with human trafficking, so the cargo must be that. Since she doesn't have an important title yet, she must complete this kind of boring assignment. She may just deliver the cargo and leave, because then so many armed men wouldn't make sense. These must be to the cargo, because if Tracy stayed they wouldn't be needed. Said the redhead, relieved seeing everything. If he was right, then he just had to wait for Tracy to leave to attack. If he was wrong, then he would have to go, because attacking Clark would be impossible with Tracy around. Although the news that Benson is dead will spread and it will be more difficult to attack Clark then. Putting that aside, he looked at his holographic screen again. Tracis' ship had already arrived at Port 6. Luckily the sound is good, he murmured as he sat on the floor of the City of Calamities ready to listen to what Tracy had to say. Rigby, seeing the woman approaching him, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva and adjust the collar of his shirt to try to cool his body a bit. Every time he saw the woman his heart pounded and his pants were tight and his underwear got wet. He couldn't help but feel inferior to her in every way, and he loved it. Bowing deeply, he greeted Tracy. "Welcome, Miss Tracy. We are ready to receive the cargo." The courtesy and emotion were clear in his voice, but he also had a slight blush. Tracy looked at the man in front of her and huffed. She could feel the stares she was getting from all the men present and it made her sick. Ignoring Rigby's greeting, she turned to look at her crew. "Bring the cargo," she ordered with power, and her men moved quickly. Being ignored didn't bother Rigby, but made his underwear a bit wetter. Ads by PubFuture. It only took a few moments for Tracis' men to return leading a long line of bound and chained people. It was clear that these people came from the southern continent due to their skin color and features. They varied in age, but the youngest seemed to be 15 years old. All these people were scared. Watching the line being brought towards him, Rigby turned to his own men and ordered them to take the reins. Following the order, the men pointed their weapons at the line as it was led out of the port. Already being controlled, Tracy nodded satisfied and turned to look at Rigby. "So far you have shown your usefulness quite well. If you keep this up, you will be able to take on different missions." Rigby trembled slightly as he bowed again with a strange smile. "It is my honor, Miss Tracy." Hearing the part made Tracy frown in annoyance. Already planning to take it out on a maid, she approached Rigby and whispered something in his ear. "Just because you have the favor of the Saintess in Black doesn't mean a mistake will be forgiven. You don't want to end up like Yennefer and Peter. Do you, Clark?" Tracis' voice was icy, and this made Rigby tremble as he let out a small moan. "No, Miss Tracy," he murmured, and Tracy, thanks to her advanced senses, could smell something that made her eyes go cold. She turned around and got on her ship while clenching her fists angrily. "Mother said don't kill him, don't kill him, don't kill him." Tracis' mind repeated over and over again. Rigby, seeing that the woman was leaving, he made a deep bow while using his shirt to discreetly cover his crotch. "Have a great night, Miss Tracy." The bird that was flying in the sky was now under the harbor, standing on a piece of wood listening to everything that was said. Inside the City of Calamities and seeing everything through, the Adrian burst out laughing. "This guy likes to be degraded and humiliated. What the fuck?" he said, laughing incredulously. He still had in his mind the clear image of how Clark was trembling as he blushed and a small wet spot formed in his crotch. He also remembered Tracis' face when she realized that. Poor Tracy. As he laughed, he watched as Tracy left in her boat, and as Clark returned with his men, he cut off the spirituality and the golden dust wrapped itself around his arm. The laughter was gone and now he was serious. "Saintess in Black. Who is that?" the redhead murmured as he raised a hand to his chin and scratched it. "I remember that Tracis' mother, Katarina Pell, is the Saintess in White, but I don't remember any Saintess in Black." No matter how much he searched his memory, nothing came to mind, so grudgingly he had to leave that for later. "It also seems that Yennefer and Peter are dead. I have no way of confirming that, but if it's true I can only get information from Clark and Stephen. If the latter is alive," shaking his head, Adrian got up from the floor. "It seems that the talk with Clark will be longer than I thought." Drawing the sphere of light in his mind, he left the City of Calamities. Opening his eyes in the roof where he had hidden, he looked in the direction where Clark is. "Are you done with your nap?" Flora asked, bored, and Adrian chuckled softly. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Moving across the rooftops, Adrian shadowed Clark and his men as they escorted the Southerners. Another characteristic that Adrian had noticed while in the East Borough was that the phrase was taken to an extreme. That's why the few people they ran into in the escort simply changed their path the moment they saw them, not wanting anything to do with it. It didn't take too long and he watched as they arrived at one of the warehouses where they entered together with the Southerners. Well, at least that makes things easier, he thought as he watched as the warehouse doors closed. Around 6 men stayed at the entrance. 2 stayed at the entrance while the other 4 divided into 2 groups of 2 and began circling the store. Narrowing his eyes, he watched the duo who went to the left and decided that they would go first. Smelling the air, he nodded. If there's one good thing that the fishy smell is so strong here, it's that the burnt meat smell will be too weak, he thought with a smile as he extended his left palm, and a bow of fire was formed. Forming the fire arrow, he aimed and extended the bowstring and released the string. He quickly created another fire arrow and fired it. The time between each arrow was very short, so when the first arrow hit the back of one, the other could not react before an arrow killed him. The blow had been clean and they died instantly. He repeated the same with the duo that went to the right and the duo that was at the door. They never saw what killed them. With the coast clear, Adrian undid the bow of fire and climbed down from the roof, and quickly made his way to the warehouse. Reaching the wall of the warehouse, he placed his ear against the wall and concentrated. Slowly he began to hear the footsteps of the people inside along with the sound of boxes being moved. Thanks to Sequence 7 Pyromaniac's keen senses, he was able to make a mental map of where each man was. About 15 men, some go together and others separate. Breaking away from the wall, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the burnt band, placing it on his left arm. The ravings of the true creator began to ring in his ears. He wasn't going to go in through the front door, that would be stupid. He was not going to lose the element of surprise. He was going to make his own entrance. Sending spirituality to the burnt band, he felt the shadows around him. Sending a little more, he did a shadow leap and stepped out from behind the shadow of a large box. He crouched. The interior of the warehouse was divided into multiple long rows around it. He at all times kept his senses open to the maximum, not losing movement from any of the guards. Bracing himself, he waited a few more seconds and jumped over the box, landing directly on a passing man. Flexing his left forearm, he plunged the hidden blade into the man's heart while covering his mouth with his other hand. While grabbing the corpse of the man, he quickly hid it behind the box where he was and advanced in silence. He heard how 3 people were approaching from a turn at the end, so he quickly approached it. Stopping behind the turn, he drew 2 throwing knives from his jacket which he held in his right hand. The distance from one man to another was considerable, he could not kill one without the other 2 warning the others. He waited until the footsteps of the first man were at his side. At the moment when the first man turned, he flexed his left forearm and plunged the hidden blade into this man's heart. Before the men behind him could react, he threw the throwing knives and it hit them square in the chest. Removing the hidden blade from the man's chest, he stopped flexing and the blade was hidden again. Moving towards the bodies of the other 2 men, he pulled out the throwing knives and held them in his right hand. He heard how 2 other men were going to turn in this line, so he prepared the throwing knives, and just as the men entered the line, he threw the knives. The men fell to the ground and Adrian ran towards them. Grabbing the bodies, he dragged them deeper into the line and hid them behind other boxes, at which point he pulled the throwing knives from the men's chests. Always holding them in his right hand, he went back the way he came and took the opportunity to hide the bodies of the 3 men he killed before. With the bodies concealed, he pulled out 2 more throwing knives and held them in his left hand. Sending spirituality to the burned band, he shadow leapt 15 meters, appearing behind a box in a row on the other side. Leaping over the box, he threw the throwing knives from his right hand at a duo who was coming towards him. The knives plunged into their chests. Turning around, he threw the throwing knives in his left hand towards a duo who had their backs to him. The bodies fell to the ground and he wasted no time hiding them and retrieving the knives. He let out a soft sigh. 10 down, now there are only 5 left. Clark included. Moving through the warehouse lines, he could clearly hear the last 5 men. They were all together. This caused a small smile to form on his face. Well, now I can use my powers to kill them without worrying about alerting the rest, the redhead thought, pleased as he approached the last group. Reaching the end, and hiding behind a box, he slightly raised his head and saw how they were lowering the Southerners through some stairs that went to the basement of the warehouse. It seems that this is where they hide the Southerners before moving them to another location, or perhaps there is a tunnel where they are transported elsewhere, the redhead assumed before shifting his gaze from behind the row. Move your ass. We don't have all night. Clark yelled as he kicked a Southerner hard, causing him to fall while grunting in pain. This annoyed Clark more and he kicked the Southerner again. Move. The Southerner grunted in pain again as he got up and headed down the stairs. All this happened while being targeted by the remaining 4 men. If any of the Southerners tried anything, they would get shot. Thanks for being together, that makes my job so much easier, he thought with a sharp smile as he took a rectangular piece of silver from his jacket. The men were normal people and Clark was only sequence 9, a slumber charm is more than enough to get the job done. Crimson. Adrian murmured in ancient Hermes and he felt how the charm in his hands turned light, ignited into an illusory dark red flame. At that moment he threw the charm towards where Clark was with his men. The charm flew until it fell in the middle of the assassin and his men, who looked at it with surprise. What? Clark said, surprised, but at that moment, a light cracking sound entered his ears and that of his men. A calm sensation enveloped them. An enemy? Where are the others? His eyelashes felt extremely heavy and he fell to one knee. The men who were normal people fell asleep, including the Southerners who were nearby, and Clark, who was a Beander, tried to resist, but he was losing the battle. When his eyelashes were almost closed, he managed to see how a hooded figure was approaching him with a completely silent step. In his blurred vision, he could see how the figure was dressed completely in black and along with a white face with large black eyes. Only one thought came to mind before he fell asleep in terror. The Reaper. Looking at Clark's sleeping figure, Adrian sighed as he removed his mask and scratched his eyes. That sleeping effect is no joke. Even though I was prepared, it still hit me hard. Shaking the sleep while shaking his head, he looked again at the sleeping figure of Clark and his men. A dark smile formed on his face and he let out a creepy chuckle. Remember your orders, Adrian said calmly to someone in front of him. Yes, sir. His clone said, making a military salute. His clone was dressed exactly like him, with the black leather jacket, the modified black windbreaker, and the mask. The other Adrian nodded and left the warehouse, heading towards the long line of kidnapped people he had led out earlier. These people were already untied but looked nervous and scared. Watching hidden, how his clone spoke with the Southerners, Adrian nodded satisfied and went further into the warehouse. It's the first time I've seen something like that, Flora said, impressed. I didn't know that a pyromaniac could create clones. Hearing that the redhead saw an opportunity, so he gently shook his head. And we can't. That you saw as one of my lord's soldiers. He allowed me to use one of his faithful men to help me in the various missions entrusted to me, said Adrian reverently, and Flora was silent. How favored is this idiot for a god to be willing to do that? Why did I decide to parasite this animal? Flora was annoyed, but she quickly responded. The benevolence of your lord is great, said Flora respectfully, and Adrian nodded. You are right, and I am very grateful for his kindness, he said as a small smile formed on his lips. This was too easy. With just a little adjustment he could change the form the soldier will take, be it human or animal. But he could only use one soldier for now. Perhaps when pyromaniac is digested I can take out more, the redhead thought. As he made his way through the rows of boxes stacked one on top of the other, the sound of chains in the distance made the smile on his face darken. Reaching the source of the sound, he saw how Clark was struggling to free himself. He had him tied with chains on his arms, neck, legs, and torso to prevent the man from escaping. And now Clark was wriggling like a snake to try to escape, but it was useless. This made Adrian let out a dark laugh that caught Clark's immediate attention, who turned to look at the hooded man. Not being under the effects of the charm, he was able to better see the appearance of the man. What he originally thought was a skull turned out to be a gloomy mask. This calmed his fear a bit, but he was still scared. This man had disposed of his men without making a sound and had caught him without him being able to fight. I'm supposed to be a Beander now. He was incredulous and his face showed that in his fear of the masked man. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not scary, I'm even friendly. Look, when you fell asleep I put you on a chair. Isn't that nice? Adrian said as he pointed to how Clark was sitting. What do you want? Money. Women. I can give it to you, you just have to let go. Clark asked as he tried to extend his hand, but the chains prevented it. Adrian shook his head. I want you to tell me where Yennefer Trump and Peter Jackson are. The mention of names made Clark uncomfortable and he looked away. I don't know who you are you talking about. Hee. Is that so huh? Adrian said while tilting his head slightly. Better for me. With a shrug he grabbed a tube from a box and approached Clark, who looked at it fearfully. Wait, what are you doing? Having the man in front of him, he saw how he aimed at his left knee. This one. Then shift to the right, or this one. What? Clark blurted out in disbelief. Adrian shrugged and slung the tube over his shoulder like it was a bat. Right then. Wait. Clark yelled, but Adrian ignored him and swung the tube hard and it hit Clark's knee. The sound of something breaking rang out along with Clark's cry of pain. Clark's knee now looked crushed. Adrian ignored Clark's yell and placed the tube on the man's left knee and repeated the question. Where are Yennefer Trump and Peter Jackson? Clark was breathing hard, tears falling from his terrified eyes. I will talk, just stop. Was it that hard? Adrian asked in exasperation as he tossed the tube aside and crouched down in front of Clark, who looked at him terrified. Speak then. Why Yennefer Trump and Peter Jackson are dead. Anything you had with them doesn't include me, I'm innocent. Clark said with difficulty and Adrian nodded. That just leaves you and Stephen. Narrowing his eyes, he asked again. Where is Stephen Kent? Clark swallowed and said nothing. At this Adrian shook his head and with his right hand, squeezed hard on Clark's shattered knee. The result was immediate. Clark cried loudly as he writhed in the chains to try. Ceasing to apply force but without removing his hand, he repeated the question. Where is Stephen Kent? He left Backland a month ago. I have no idea where he is, Clark replied with difficulty as thick beads of sweat covered his forehead. The revelation made Adrian cluck his tongue in annoyance. So my only source of information is this guy. Single quote. Sighing in exasperation, he squeezed the man's knee again, who screamed again. Counting 15 seconds, he stopped applying force and Clark breathed as he cried. Why? He asked weakly, but Adrian asked coldly. In June, you helped the demoness sect sneak witches into a party. Who were those witches? Clark's eyes widened and he shook his head. He seemed to have gained more energy. I won't say anything. They'll kill me if I do it. He yelled, but Adrian just nodded as he stood up. If you don't tell me now, then the witches will be your least worry. Adrian's voice was dark and it made Clark tremble with terror. I just helped the witches go unnoticed while Yennefer and Peter made sure they got in. And Stephen? Adrian growled. He took on a special job. I don't know anything about what he did. Clark screamed in terror. Adrian formed a ball of fire in his hand and brought it close to Clark's face, who screamed in terror. I'll tell you what some witches look like and you'll tell me their names. Am I clear? I won't say anything. You didn't learn anything from last time. Shaking his head, Adrian placed the fireball on Clark's left leg. His clothing quickly burned, as did the skin and flesh underneath. Clark squirmed much harder but nothing worked. The chains were thick and well placed, which meant that no matter how much he moved he couldn't escape. Black hair with green eyes. What is her name? The redhead asked calmly as he continued to cook Clark's leg. Selena, her name is Selena. Clark screamed in agony and Adrian nodded and pushed the fireball away. This made Clark stop squirming, but he was still crying hard in pain. Stop. The man begged, but Adrian ignored him. Blonde hair and emerald green eyes. What is her name? This time Clark trembled and closed his mouth. The redhead just reached his hand to the man's leg and cooked it again. Clark writhed again as he cried out in pain but never responded. This continued until he passed out from so much pain and Adrian clicked his tongue as he undid the fireball. The pants Clark had worn had fused with his skin, which was now a waxy white hot pink. It stretched from his thigh to his knee. Looking at Clark's state with cold eyes, he just slapped him hard. This woke up the man, who was in a daze and drool was dripping down his open mouth. Holding the man's chin, Adrian made him look at him. What is the name of that witch? He asked with pure coldness, and Clark finally murmured an answer. Maria, he murmured very weakly, and Adrian released him, making his head hang. Mercy. Clark raised his head weakly, but he watched as Adrian pointed his palm at him. A torrent of fire shot out of Adrian's palm and completely engulfed Clark, who screamed in pure agony. Adrian finished his attack while Clark continued to scream and writhe in pain. Only this time the man was completely covered in fire. Adrian ignored the man's suffering as he took out a few different colored candles from his jacket. When Clark stopped writhing and screaming in pain, he was already a vivid pink and black body and his clothes had fused with his body. Not wanting to waste time, Adrian formed a fire sword in his hand and pierced the man's heart to make sure he was already dead. We have 15 minutes before his spirit vanishes, Flora reminded and Adrian just nodded. Grabbing Clark's leg, he dragged the man's body to the candles. He then formed a wall of spirituality around the body and the candles. What he was going to do was one of the rituals he had learned from reading the book the detective had given him. He positioned the body so that his arms and legs were extended, as if he were trying to make a snow angel. The candles were arranged in an order of black, gold, light blue, blue, and white. These candles were made of goat fat. Extending his hand, he formed a small ball of fire that lit each candle one by one. As the candles lit, he removed his mask and placed it around his waist. He took a metal vial from his jacket and opened it. Pulling the vial closer, he took a slight sniff. He could smell the various ingredients he had used to create it: mint, wisdom flower, saffron, and chrysanthemum. He poured some of this mixture into his hands and closed the vial. He spread this mixture on Clark's body and with what was left he poured it on his forehead. He closed his eyes and prayed in ancient Hermes. I pray for the power of knowledge. I pray for the power of rationality. I pray that you allow me to communicate with the spirit of this heretic. He had already explained to Flora that there was no problem with using other gods for rituals and that this was the best thing since his lord was hidden and he couldn't just use his honorific name. Flora accepted this uncomfortably, but she could understand it. She had never heard of a god with the name of Red Priest, so this seemed rational to her. At that moment, Adrian felt how the space he had created with the wall of spirituality had calmed down and entered a state of serenity. Sensing that it was done, he used his index finger to touch his left palm twice. His vision shifted and he saw Clark Down's spirit hovering over his body. Clark's eyes were blurry and dazed, his arms dangling. He make his first question. Where are Yennefer Trump and Peter Jackson? They are dead. They failed their missions and were killed by the demonist sect, Clark replied with an emotionless voice. Adrian nodded and asked again. Where is Stephen Kent? He was sent on a secret mission. I don't know his whereabouts. This had always been his plan, to interrogate Clark's spirit. He didn't care what Clark said, he wasn't going to trust any of the words that came out of his mouth. So that little torture was more for him. His only regret is that Clark broke so easily. Zio had a more difficult time with Billy. Compared to him, Clark is a baby. He asked the same questions that he had asked when Clark was alive and the answers were the same. And just came the part that he wanted the most. Tell me everything you know about the witch Maria, Adrian asked coldly. Clark's spirit trembled, not wanting to respond but still did because of the ritual. She's a high-ranking witch. Clark's voice carried a little more emotion. That's all. Adrian thought, annoyed. Seeing that there could be problems with the ritual, he decided to change the subject for now. What is your relationship with the Zemanger gang? I am merely a spy to see their activities and report them to my superior, he said without emotion. Adrian narrowed his eyes. Were any of the men here from the Zemanger gang? None. They are all members of a gang created to help with trafficking. Adrian nodded and, not having another question in mind, he just asked another to satisfy his curiosity. Who is the Saintess in Black? At the question, Clark's spirit twisted as he slowly opened his mouth. SSS. Before he could say a name, Clark's spirit was engulfed in black fire and was quickly devoured by it. The black fire broke the ritual and the candles went out. Adrian jumped back in surprise at this and he saw how Clark's body was covered in black fire, being consumed by it, only leaving ashes. Wow, the redhead said, impressed, but his surprise didn't last long as Flora spoke. It seems that he was cursed to prevent him from saying anything about that Saintess in Black. This is a common thing in the demonist sect. Can we get out of here now? The smell in here is annoying. You can smell the outside when you're inside me. Weird, Adrian thought, slightly surprised as he answered. We'll leave, but first I have to prepare a gift, Adrian said as he went to where he had hidden the bodies of Clark's men. It was late at night, in an Evernight Goddess church on Turner Street. Meg Truce was one of those in charge of taking care of the church. She was now cleaning the candle holders. Maybe some meat. No, maybe chicken with a bit of vegetables. Yes, that. Why following diets have to be so difficult? Meg thought exasperatedly as she descended the short ladder. A carriage. At this time of night? The woman thought with surprise. It's already past 10 p.m. Why would there be a carriage outside? Since the nights on Turner Street were so quiet, it wasn't hard for her to hear the outside. Maybe he's just a rich man who took a shortcut to the West Borough. Meg assumed as she led the ladder to the next candle holder. It was not uncommon for this street to be used as a shortcut, as it was a straight line to the West Borough. It was normally used as a shortcut by the rich. But the closer it got, the more she frowned. That's too many wheels. Is it really just one carriage? Being a curious person, she lowered the ladder to the ground and approached the church window and stuck her head out. What she saw surprised her. Lit by the crimson moon was a carriage that was pulling two others using 4 horses. The driver, she could see, was a hooded man dressed in black. Due to the distance, she couldn't see him better. The lamps that hung on its sides were wobbling slightly in the night wind. When the carriage pulled up to the front of the church, she watched as the driver stopped and got out. He began to walk towards the door of the church, and this scared her. She quickly moved away from the window and away from the front door. Is that driver a ghost? Like in the tales of terror of Emperor Russell? Meg thought, scared. Her hands were covering her mouth, preventing any sound from coming out. She still remembered how her mother told her the story of how a headless horseman moved through the dark nights on his horseback in search of his missing head. This rider even used a pumpkin as a replacement for his head until he found the real one. She jumped when she heard the door being knocked on by the driver. Touch all you want, Mr. Ghost. I'm not going to open the door for you. This is the house of the goddess and you are not welcome. Meg thought confidently as she hid behind the altar. That confidence was broken when she saw another caretaker head for the door. Ads by PubFuture. Wait, Fred. Don't open the door. Meg tried to shout in a low voice to warn her partner, but it was too late. He had already opened the door. Sir, the church is closed. Fred's words died in his mouth when he saw the man's face. His skin, which was slightly brown, had turned pale and his mouth hung hanging at the sight of the mask the man was wearing. Mr. H. Holmes, what brings you here? Fred said shakily, and Holmes took a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to him. All the caretakers had received a notice that if a man dressed in black and with a gloomy mask appeared at the door of the church, they had to avoid angering or provoking him. Everyone knew that this man's name was Mr. Holmes. Looking at the paper that was extended to him, Fred took it with a trembling hand as he smiled at the man in front of him. Give this to the father. He'll know what to do with it. I'm also entrusting these Southerners to you. Hearing the man's words, Fred was at a loss and couldn't help but blurt out. What? Holmes ignored him and turned to look at the super carriage, and whistled loudly. The doors of the carriages opened and many Southern people got out of them and looked around frightened. Seeing where Holmes was, they ran towards him. He will see that you are safely returned to the southern continent, Holmes said calmly as he pointed to Fred, who looked at this in shock. Wait, Mr. Holmes. Fred tried to say something, but the Southerners surrounded him and started talking to him at the same time. Fred tried to calm the horde and at the same time catch up with Holmes, who was slowly walking away. The Southerners wouldn't let him pass and he could only watch helplessly as Holmes disappeared into the night. Listening to what was happening at the front door, Meg hid deeper into the altar. I tried to warn you, Fred, but you didn't listen. Thought sobbing Meg. May you find rest in the realm of the goddess. She prayed with tears in her eyes as she touched her chest 4 times in a circle. ... Looking at the scene in front of him, Watson could only take a puff on his cigarette and sigh. What's wrong with this guy? He said tiredly. After receiving a notice from the Rich Star Church that Mr. Holmes had visited and had left a large group of Southerners. He with his team and several others had come to the church to help and found out a little about what had happened. It is known that the Southerners had been kidnapped and taken to a warehouse but were later rescued by Mr. Holmes, who brought them there in some carriages that he stole. Ads by PubFuture. Because the Southerners didn't know where that warehouse was, they thought that it would be difficult to find it. But the paper left by Mr. Holmes detailed where it was. This is how he arrived with another team and found this scene. Hanging on hooks in the rows of the warehouse were the bodies of multiple men. Hung up like meat to dry. Seeing the image in front of him, he took a drag on his cigarette. His team lowered the bodies from the hooks and began to count them. After a while, Kevin came up to him with a book in hand. Captain, in total there are 20 bodies. Almost all of them died from stab wounds, but 6 died from something very hot going through them. We will have to wait for Caliph to better check the bodies to get more information, Kevin explained seriously as he read the book in his hand. They also had these cards on them, he said uncomfortably as he handed him several cards. Watson took them and read them. Sincerely, James Holmes greater than. His eyebrow twitched reading that and he sighed as he handed them back to Kevin. Divine them and tell me if we get something this time, Watson said, but he already knew internally that it would be useless. Understood, Captain, Kevin nodded and walked away from Watson. Looking around, he took another puff on his cigarette but suddenly heard a lot of noise outside the warehouse along with the other team. At the entrance, Watson ordered as he ran to the entrance, followed by his team. Going outside, he saw in amazement how several women were ranging from 14 to 27 years old who were dressed in tight clothes. They were all scared and the other team was trying to calm them down. What is happening, Connor? Watson seriously asked the other captain, who was a man with short black hair and blue eyes. I don't know, Watson. They came all of a sudden shouting something about a hero, Connor replied loudly. Treat the ladies with care, gentlemen. A strong voice sounded, drowning out the women and the Nighthawks, who looked up and saw how there was a man on top of the warehouse. This man was dressed completely in black along with a creepy mask. Holmes, Watson thought in astonishment, but before he could do anything, Holmes turned and lost sight of him. Catch him, Connor and Watson ordered at the same time. Kevin, Taylor, Siri, stay with the ladies. The rest with me, Watson quickly ordered as he ran towards the stairs that led to the roof of the warehouse. Connor did the same, leaving 3 of his team behind and quickly climbed onto the roof following Watson. Upon reaching the roof, Holmes was nowhere to be found, but now the Nighthawks could see how in the distance a building was burning. And you're seriously not a white knight? Flora asked, amused, and Adrian sighed. Now he was walking through the sewers. As I told you before, I'm not. But if I have the opportunity to help, I'll do it as long as it's not dangerous. In his talk with Benson, the fatty had tried to save himself with various things, money, and women of all ages. In one of those he revealed the existence of the cave, and thinking that it would be useful, he made him sing about it. What he heard made him feel repulsed, everything about the work of the women there, and that there were even children there. When he finished his talk with Clark, and after collecting his characteristic and taking everything related to the altar and leaving the gift for the Nighthawks, he paid a visit to this. Security was poor, so it was easy to sneak in. Finding the boss was also very easy feat. This one was not discreet. Having multiple big strong men around you is not very discreet. After a fight that was more of a massacre, only the boss remained and he tied him to a chair to burn along with the building. Then he took all the women he found to the warehouse where he knew the Nighthawks would go. Honestly, he didn't expect them to be there, but it didn't matter, losing them was child's play. Besides, it's not like I left empty-handed, he said as he waved a bag that hung over his shoulder. Whatever you say, little knight, Flora said, dragging her tongue before laughing. Shaking his head, Adrian continued on his way through the sewers, removing the burnt band from his arm. Now he was on his way to his hotel room. Coming out of the shadows, he was already in his room. His room was dark and he kept it that way so he could use Shadow Leap more easily. Approaching the table, he placed the bag in it. He took a small container from his pocket and placed it next to the table. After that, he took off all the Holmes costume and put them in another bag. Now he was only in his underwear. Flora was slowly getting used to this sight, but something caught her eye. Why do his pecs seem bigger? Confused, she compared Adrian's pecs from before using her memory and realized that it was so. Yes, they are a little bigger. Somewhat surprised, she took a good look at Adrian and saw some new differences. Finding this a way to annoy Adrian, she showed her amusement. Adrian, what's wrong with your body? Raising an eyebrow in surprise, the redhead finished putting on his old worker's pants. What are you talking about? Flora's response was to laugh in amusement as she answered. Look at yourself in a mirror. That's not good, the redhead thought, a little worried as he went to his closet and opened it. From one of the drawers, he took out a medium mirror that he had bought to help him apply the charcoal to his face. Looking at himself, he saw that his face had changed only a bit. The differences were minimal, but if someone who knew him very well and had excellent memory saw his face, they would say that he had become more delicate. His face had become, to say, a little more effeminate, and his eyelashes had lengthened slightly. His eyebrows also looked more delicate than before. The changes were tiny to the point that even if someone had a before photo, it would be hard for them to spot the difference. His eyes slowly widened in horror and he searched his entire body, finding another change. His waist had become a bit smaller. This greatly amused Flora, whose laughter only grew louder as Adrian turned pale. His brain was on full blast trying to find a reason for this. His eyes sparkled and he raised a hand to his face. During everything I did in the cave, the extra hunter potion I drank had been digested. These changes will not be for that, right? Does this get worse when the pyromaniac potion is digested? The hunter is supposed to be the pathway of masculinity, thought Adrian incredulously, not finding the meaning of this, and Flora's laughter didn't help anything. He had to sit in the chair for a moment to understand what was happening. Okay, I must think. Could it be because of the influence of the City of Calamities? It is the Sephira that is connected with the Red Priest and Demoness path. One is masculinity and the other is femininity. Perhaps my body will present some characteristics of the other path when I climb higher in the sequences. An image of him appeared as a bearded man with breasts and hips like a model, with a fine face and excessively thick lips. This mental image made him gag. Flora laughed harder. Adrian's head hung in defeat and he let out a long breath. At least the changes are minor, plus it doesn't affect my mind. I just hope this doesn't get worse. Rising from the chair, he formed a wall of spirituality and placed the red candles and red poppies in position on the floor along with the paper with the symbol. He knelt and joining his hands to pray, he closed his eyes. Flora was no longer laughing and had remained silent. Finally, my head was already aching from hearing that old lady's laugh. He opened his mouth and prayed in ancient Hermes. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. ... Closing the door of flames, he looked at what floated in front of him. The container with Clark's characteristic, he had sealed with a wall of spirituality. Extending his hand, he caused the yellow smoke that covered the things he had left behind to disperse. He made the container float there, and after that, he covered it again with the yellowish smoke. With that done, he sat down on the yellow floor and sighed. I'm not interested in making an assassin for my ritual, so these characteristics are useless to me and I don't want to use them to create an artifact either. I'll wait a bit before sending these to Isengard so I can accumulate more contribution points in the church. He looked up at the sky and saw the floating yellow clouds. The memory of the witch who killed Grievous came to his mind. So your name is Maria, huh? He whispered to the sky. He finally had a name to put on that face. I couldn't get almost any information related to her. The only thing I know is that she is a high-ranking witch. Maybe Steven knows something else, but he's on a hidden mission on who knows where, so he's ruled out. Besides, who the fuck is the Saint in Black? That title was never mentioned in Klein's story. Well, it's not like he's related to the demoness sect that deeply either, so it makes sense that she's never been mentioned. Shaking his head, Adrian formed the sphere of light in his mind and left the City of Calamities. Standing up from the floor, he made his way to his closet and pulled out the rest of his worker costume. His face had coal again and the bandages on his hands were dirty. Adjusting his hat, he replaced the burnt band and shadow leapt out. His room returned to its silence, but this only lasted a few more minutes as Adrian re-entered, only this time through the door. Locking the door and removing his hat, he tossed it aside. Pretending that I just got back from work is the best. This will prevent the fucking old man from sticking his nose where it doesn't suit him. He took a handkerchief out of his pocket and used it to wipe his face. Flora, I have a question. Don't you have a messenger to notify your family of your situation? Flora, after being quiet for a few seconds, she let out a soft sigh. I have a messenger, but I avoid using it if possible. When you have that as an enemy, you have to mistrust everything to survive. We already had several cases in which that man used the messengers to find us, so they are now frowned upon. It's better to notify them of my status at the party instead of using the messenger. Flora finished explaining with a little fear. You could tell and feel the fear she had of that man because of the way she mentioned him. Her voice trembled and even broke a little. Adrian just nodded without comment and just grabbed one of the white goat fat candles from his bag. I asked you that because I plan to contract a messenger and I need your help, the redhead asked with a smile as he played with the candle, throwing it up and down. Do you care what I told you, or was it just to bother me? The woman thought, annoyed as she answered. You are annoying little princess. Hearing the new nickname the parasite lady gave him made the corners of Adrian's mouth quiver slightly. He quickly recovered and responded with equal venom. Oh, now we are with the nicknames, miss. Flora almost let out an insult but caught herself in time and played along, returning poison with poison. I think this can improve our relationship, Mr. Cow Breasts. Then it will be a pleasure, miss, Adrian already replied with his smile trembling a little. I did not. Coughing slightly to recover from that and avoid continuing her explosion, Flora said with extra venom and provocation. The pleasure will be mine, sir. What is it with my pecs that you mention them so much? Do you like them? Adrian responded flirtatiously as he brought his elbows under his stomach and this brought out the pecs under his shirt to bulge. This movement made Flora break and her eyes stuck to the redhead's bulging pecs. They look so soft, Flora thought unconsciously, but Adrian hadn't finished. If you had a body I wouldn't have a problem with you playing with them. He licked his lips seductively as he closed one eye and bounced his pecs. Fuck you. Flora screamed in complete embarrassment as she closed her eyes at such a scene but opened one slightly. She could clearly see how the redhead's nipples stood out and this made her swallow. Suddenly her throat was dry. At such a realization she quickly changed the subject before her mind went back to creating weird scenarios. Do you want my help or not? Adrian gave a flirtatious smile as he parted his elbows, but if you looked closely you could see that he had a small blush on his cheeks. Please. ... Adrian created a wall of spirituality, then he made a common altar in the middle of the room with a single candle. Then he went to the table in the room and grabbed a parchment of goats in along with a simple fountain pen. Everything in order, Flora? Adrian asked with a small smile as if what happened before had never happened. Everything is fine, Flora answered shortly. She was still embarrassed by what happened earlier and couldn't look at the redhead because her gaze would fall on too big, soft, squeezable. AAHHHHHHRGGGGGG, Flora screamed loudly in her mind trying to shut those weird thoughts. So here I go. This done, he knelt before the simple altar and opened his mouth. I was said in ancient Hermes. I call on my name. This was said in Hermes. A special spirit that wanders through the upper realm. A trustworthy spirit that is friendly to humans. A spirit that is willing to be my messenger. The temperature in Adrian's room dropped several degrees rapidly, he could even see his breathing. A cold chill ran down his spine. Using his index finger to touch his palm twice he activated his spiritual vision. He saw in this new view how in front of the altar white bones began to break through the floor and slowly built a door. Ads by PubFuture. All the bones were from different species but most were human. When the last bone, which was the skull of a big bird, was joined in the middle of this frame of bones, the gate was completed, but there was something curious about this gate. Is it very high? Perhaps about 5 meters. It reaches my ceiling, the redhead mentally calculated, seeing this gloomy door worthy of a Halloween movie. Suddenly the door opened, and a black space was revealed. This space was turbulent and dark. Adrian could only see how what seemed to be spirits moved through it, but suddenly they separated, forming an arc in which he could see how something was coming towards him. He couldn't recognize what it was due to the turbulence of the door, but he didn't feel any danger and Flora didn't say anything either, so everything was under control. Finally, the figure made it to the door and Adrian looked surprised at how it was so tall that it had to duck to get through it. From the black, turbulent, and spirit-filled entrance came a beautiful woman. The woman's skin was pale as a corpse, her eyes were gray with white pupils. Her long black hair fell to her lower back like the feathers of a raven. She was wearing a long skirt adorned with a great variety of feathers and gems of different colors. A wide cotton shirt with colored scarves to cover her shoulders, and on top of this she wore what appeared to be an escapel. She must be over 5 meters tall. Adrian thought in astonishment as he looked at the woman who looked at him with her gray eyes. From her clothing she must have originally been from the southern continent. Because of the bones and how she entered, maybe she is from the death pathway, but why is she so tall? Was one of her parents a giant? The woman gently tilted her head, but her face remained the same without showing any change. It seemed like she wanted to show her doubt. Don't just stare at her. Flora complained to him and Adrian abandoned his crazy theories. Realizing that he had only been doing that, he coughed softly and looking into the woman's eyes he spoke. Thank you for answering my call, spirit. How is your speed to traverse the spirit world and how is your survivability? He asked in Hermes, but the woman tilted her head to the other side again. This caused him to let out an awkward laugh and he repeated the question in Elvish. He hoped this was enough as his ancient Faceac still needed a lot of practice and that it was no necessary to use ancient Hermes. Please, understand me, Adrian mentally pleaded, and when he saw the woman nod his face lit up. I'm fast and strong. The woman's voice was much softer than he expected and there was also a serenity in it that even affected him. Although there was also a strong accent. Would you like to form a contract to be my messenger? The woman barely moved her head enough to give a nod. Each delivery. A chocolate bar. A chocolate bar. I expected something more strange, but this is even normal. Is she actually a very tall little girl? Having no problem with that part, he nodded. Then we will discuss the contract. The tall woman nodded. I plan to use multiple names and identities in the future. Do you have a problem with this? The gray-eyed woman barely shook her head to deny it. No problem. It doesn't matter what name you use. It will always be you. Raising a red eyebrow, he looked curiously at the woman. What is that supposed to mean? You mean that no matter what name I use, you'll always know it's me they're referring to? At the question, the woman nodded again, barely making enough movement to complete it. How curious, Adrian thought as he lowered his eyebrow. Ads by PubFuture. Then we can sign the contract. Grabbing the goatskin parchment and the simple font pen he had prepared earlier, he began to write the terms of the contract in a language that could move nature, ancient Hermes. The content was the same as the instructions Klein had received from Azek and also some recommendations from Flora. They were concise and to the point, and they contained clauses such as the messenger not being allowed to look at the letter, not discarding the letter, or endangering the life of the contractor. Of course, if the contents of the letter were related to the messenger had to be informed in advance. He also placed that the contractor or the one who received the letter would be in charge of delivering the chocolate bar. No, the woman's voice stopped him and he looked up surprised. I will only accept chocolate bars from you. In the woman's voice there was a little more seriousness and this made Adrian look stunned at the gray-eyed woman. What kind of request is that? Do you mistrust strangers? Are you really a very tall little girl? How it was no problem getting the chocolate bars, he just sighed and nodded. Okay, I will change it. Adrian tossed the goatskin parchment to one side and grabbed another. Luckily I prepared several others, the redhead thought with relief as he wrote everything that was in the previous one except the last part. After writing all that and making sure that there is nothing that would bother the gray-eyed woman again, he began to write a sentence that pointed to the underworld. A special recommendation from Flora. He could also use the honorific name of Death and the force of the contract would be stronger, but he preferred not to try his luck because Death has not fallen completely. He preferred to avoid trouble. So he wrote the sentence that pointed to the underworld in ancient Hermes. Hell hidden deep within the spirit world. The witness of the decomposition of all living beings. One who belongs solely to the realm of death greater than. As he wrote the last word of the sentence, the goatskin parchment burst into green flames, giving his room an air of a Disney villain's lair. With that done he wrote his current name on the parchment, James Holmes. According to the words of the super tall woman, it didn't matter what name he used, but for safety it was better that he use another. Now the third sentence of the messenger was, the spirit that belongs to James Holmes. The scroll with the simple fountain pen flew to the woman who took the pen in her right hand and wrote her name, Chicho, Ma, Kuamal. Adrian looked at the woman in a daze. What kind of name is that? How am I supposed to say that? Chicho, Chicho, Chicho. Before he could continue to think about how to pronounce the name, the woman snapped her fingers and the contract glowed for a few moments. Adrian was about to cut off the ritual for fear that the woman had done something to the contract, but she simply showed it to him before he could open his mouth. The contract remained the same, but the only thing that had changed was the third invocation sentence. From it changed to, after that the contract was consumed by the green flames leaving only ash, and the simple fountain pen fell into the hand of Adrian, who stared dumbly at the woman in front of him. She just nodded a little more energetically before disappearing from the room. She really is like a little girl, thought Adrian, stunned, not understanding what had just happened. Ads by PubFuture. Exhaling, Adrian stood up and after cleaning and hiding what he had used to make the simple altar, he took down the wall of spirituality. Thanks for the help, Flora, the redhead said, nodding with a small smile. I don't want you to end up killing us for making a mistake in a sentence, so I had no choice. I was just trying to be chivalrous, Miss Rat. The redhead shook his head as he lay down on his bed. Flora snorted at Adrian's words, not giving it any importance. What most caught her attention was something else. That spirit woman's clothing has some similarity to the clothing worn in the Balaam Empire in the fourth epic, but there are differences. The books she had read in her family's library about one of the most powerful empires in all of history had fascinated her. She knew everything there was to know about the Balaam Empire. Whether its culture, food, economy, and history. Recognizing the clothes that woman was wearing was child's play for her, but also thanks to that she could notice a problem with her. It's as if her clothes were a prototype of what the clothes of the Balaam Empire were, but that doesn't make sense. The Balaam Empire lasted most of the fourth epic, that would mean that this spirit must be from at least the third epic or older. Ignorant of Flora's thoughts, Adrian stared at the ceiling of his room as he thought about what to do next. I finally have a messenger. It was easier than I thought. Now I just have to commission an artisan to make me something like Klein's harmonica to make it easier to summon her. I don't want to have to go through a ritual every time I have to send a letter. Well, I still have that weird grandfather who created Talk Millennium. I just have to wait for Isengard to hold a meeting and I can commission him to make it for me. Now what could it be? A whistle or a harmonica? Nah, that's boring and repetitive, it has to be something more special. I'm a hunter, maybe a bell is the right thing. After giving it a thought, the bell seemed the most suitable to him. He already had the full hunter outfit, so why not go for the full set? This caused the corners of his mouth to rise slightly. Although I would still need the saw cleaver. Leaving that aside, in the morning I'll go buy some chocolate bars so I can send a letter to Isengard. I'll also go to Braveheart's bar to notify Marich and Sharon. I'll also leave a letter to tell Zio to stop investigating the other policemen. I'll also give her my messenger's information so she'll have a quicker way to contact me. Mrs. Peach, this is all I got regarding your request, Isengard said as he handed a file to a middle-aged woman, Mary Peach. He had received a commission from Mary to investigate her husband. Ads by PubFuture. Thank you, Detective Isengard. I hope the £10 I paid was worth it, replied the woman as she grabbed the file. She suspected that her husband was being unfaithful with the neighbor from Unit 12, but she hadn't been able to get much out of it on her own. That was why she had resorted to using a detective to help her, and since she was from the upper middle class, she could afford to hire a renowned one like Isengard Staten. Her fingers trembled slightly and she had to take a few moments to recover. Oh goddess, I pray this is just my paranoia, Mary pleaded mentally. The truth is that she was terrified. She had known Mario when she was little, and they met when they went to church with their respective parents. She loves her husband deeply, and just thinking that he was unfaithful made her heart ache. Steeling herself and controlling the trembling of her fingers, she opened the file and began to read. Isengard grabbed the cup of tea that was on his table and took a sip as he watched the woman's expression drop for a few moments before showing confusion to surprise and realization. So it was that her heart no longer was aching. Instead, it was beating with happiness. Your reputation certainly precedes you, Detective. Thank you very much for your help, Mary said as she closed the file with a small smile. Isengard noticed how the woman's eyes seemed to shine. It's my job, Mrs. Peach. Mary gave a soft laugh as she used her hand to gracefully cover her mouth. If I ever need a detective, I know where to look, Mary said with a smile as she turned to a woman sitting next to her. Alexa, we're leaving now. Yes, ma'am, Alexa said, nodding gently as she waited for Mary to get up and then stand up. She was Mary's servant. Have a nice day, Detective, Mary said with a smile. Allow my servant to show you to the door, Isengard said as he stood up, but Mary gently shook her head. No need, Detective. I've bothered you enough already. With those words, Mary and Alexa left Isengard's house, who was now in his study. He had his trusty pipe in his mouth and was taking a puff of his favorite tobacco while listening to a soft melody. At that moment he felt how the temperature in the room dropped several degrees and he felt a chill go up his spine. This didn't alarm him but made him raise a curious eyebrow. Ads by PubFuture. Another message from the church. How curious, the last message was not long ago. I wonder what it is this time, he thought as he activated his spiritual vision by rubbing his thumbnail. But his calm was broken when he saw how white bones came out of the floor and quickly began to form a door of bones. This is not the messenger of the church. On guard, he quickly jumped back away from the bone gate and pulled from his vest a small silver container. He opened it and the wall of spirituality that covered it broke. From the container he took out a ring and placed it on his finger. Feeling his brain working overtime made him frown, but he resisted and watched as the door was completed. As the white, fragmented skull of a great bird attached itself to the door frame, it swung open, revealing a swirling black space behind it. He couldn't see what was in that space because a huge woman over 5 meters came out of it. The woman looked at him with her gray eyes for a few moments before handing him a letter along with a container. "From your student," she said in Elvish with a thick accent, and Isengard's eyes widened. Adrian, not letting his guard down, he looked at the tall woman seriously, but she ignored him and placed the letter and container on the man's desk. After doing that, she took out a chocolate bar from her sleeves and began to eat it while heading to the door of bones. Throughout that course, Isengard did not lose a detail of her, and when the door of bones disappeared, he did not turn off his spiritual vision but began to review his study. Finding nothing strange, he looked at the things the giant had left on his desk. Still with the ring on his finger, he took out a coin from his pocket. "That letter is from Adrian." After mentally repeating that 7 times, he tossed the coin and it landed in his open palm. "Correct." Putting the coin in his pocket and taking the ring off his finger, he sighed as he scratched his forehead and turned off his spiritual vision. Resealing the ring and keeping it in his vest, and now calmer, he went to his desk and grabbed the letter, opening it. Reading the entire content of the letter and lowering it, he just sighed again while grabbing his pipe that had fallen after that scare. Using a handkerchief, he began to clean it as he absorbed what he had read. Adrian formed a contract with a spirit and now he has a messenger. "He never ceases to amaze me." He asked if I had some pages of Emperor Rassel's notes. Is he trying to decipher the code in which they are written? In the envelope there were also 30 pounds which he grabbed and put in his pocket. "Seriously, he is a strange man, but I think I can fulfill this for you. I have some pages that I have been collecting throughout my time in Backland. I will copy them and send them to him using his messenger." The summoning incantation was written on the letter. Besides, with a serious look, he grabbed the container and opened it, breaking the wall of spirituality. Inside the container was a viscous liquid of a pale purple color. How come he runs into so many beyonders? This is the second characteristic he has given me, and my intuition tells me it won't be the last. Sighing, Isengard closed the container again and reapplied the wall of spirituality. After completing the ritual to call his messenger, Adrian cleaned and hid everything but kept the wall of spirituality. Sitting on the only chair in his room, he waited for his messenger to reappear. "I didn't know you were interested in Rassel's notes," Flora asked curiously. Flora's words made Adrian sigh internally. He was disappointed in himself, but he kept a calm expression, and with a small smile he replied, "I'm not. It's a mission I was given by my lord to collect it." Whenever he spoke of his, he made sure to use a more respectful voice and show more reverence. This is so that Flora would not doubt his story. "So it's like that," Flora said, losing all interest in the topic. "Don't meddle in God's business." Seeing that Flora didn't speak anymore, Adrian formed a ball of fire and began to play with it. Throwing the fireball from one hand to the other, he lost himself in his mind. "I can understand simplified Chinese, but it's really hard for me to write it. If I tried to fake a page, Klein would notice and that would cause problems, so I can only get the pages in the way. I still don't want Klein or anyone else to find out that I'm a true transmigrator. If any god knows of my existence, it is almost certain that they think that I fell from Saphira Castle, and I want it to stay that way. My transmigration is my greatest weapon and defense. Perhaps when Klein matures more, I will tell him that I am a modern person like him, but that is far away. Now he is too green and it would be risky to reveal that information. At least I might find something useful in Rassel's diary, since I'm sure Klein couldn't read it all. Although I can only read them in the City of Calamities." As he thought about that, time passed slowly. He was controlling fire ravens to do tricks in the air when the temperature in the room dropped and a chill ran up his spine. Snapping the fingers of his right hand, he made the crows disappear at the same time as he activated his spiritual vision. The white bones broke through the ground and began to form the large bone gate. When the skull of that great bird was attached to the door frame, it swung open, revealing the black and turbulent space from which its messenger emerged. "From the detective," she said as she handed him a rather thick envelope. Adrian smiled at the woman as he reached into his vest and pulled out a bar of chocolate. "Thanks, Chicho," he said as he handed the chocolate to the woman, who nodded with a little more energy. When he summoned her again to send the letter to Isengard, he had asked her if he could call her Chicho. The woman's name was difficult to say and also very long, so he decided to give her a nickname instead. Chicho accepted the nickname. Unwrapping the chocolate bar, she began to eat it as she stepped back through the bone door and left the room. In her hands, that chocolate bar looks like a simple candy. Maybe that's why she asked for it to be a bar, the redhead thought curiously as he opened the envelope. Inside this was what he assumed were the pages of the diary that were separated by a thread, and next to it was a letter. The first thing he did was grab the letter and read it. Underscore for my student underscore. It seems you've been busy. I'm amazed, Adrian. I didn't expect you to get a messenger, but this makes it easier to contact you. The characteristics will be sent to the church and as you requested will be converted into contribution points. Ads by PubFuture. I must admit that your messenger gave me quite a scare. For a moment I thought it was an enemy and I almost attacked her. It would have been nice if you had warned me, but it doesn't matter. In the envelope are the pages of Russell's notes that I managed to collect throughout my stay in Backland. I'm not sure why you want them, but I'll assume you have your reasons. If you need something else, just send me a letter. Underscore sincerely, Isengard underscore. Finishing reading the letter, Adrian let out a short laugh. Sorry about that, teacher. He even heard Flora giggle. Shaking his head, he pulled the diary pages from the envelope and gave them a quick glance as he went through each one, counting them. He didn't keep his gaze on them for more than a second to prevent Flora from thinking that he could understand them. Turning the last page, he nodded. 15 in total, not bad. He took out of his jacket the red candles and the red poppies along with the symbol. ... Inside the city of calamities. Closing the door of flames, he looked down at the pages of the diary that were in his hand. Now he could read them calmer without worrying about attracting attention, but he could only stay here for 2 minutes. Underscore November 13th underscore. Russell's handwriting is horrible, the redhead mumbled. Now that he could see the pages better, he was able to realize the reality of the Emperor's handwriting. It's as if he had been drunk at the time of writing each page. Ignoring that, he started to read the rest because he didn't have much time. Underscore November 13th underscore. This is the first and last time I have a threesome with another man. I don't even know how I agreed to do that in the first place. I sure drink too many glasses of wine. For anyone who can understand my diary, please listen to my suffering, because what happened last night I don't plan to reveal it to another soul in my life. If you understand my diary, that means you are a fellow one, so I can tolerate revealing this to you. It all started at the birthday party of the wife of one of the high-ranking men in the government. Obviously, since I am the protagonist of this era, I was invited, so I attended because the man's wife is beautiful. Since I saw her for the first time in Parliament, I knew that she had to be one of my conquests, so when I saw that her husband had gone to talk to his friends, I knew that an opportunity had come. She turned out to be much more flirtatious than I thought. The women of Intis are without a doubt special. Just when I thought I could finally win her over, her husband came back. I thought I had lost my chance, but something happened that I didn't expect even a woman from Intis to be able to say. She, with her damn husband by her side, looked me in the eye and said, "Would you like to have a threesome with us?" I swear I thought her husband was going to hit me, but he just gave me a knowing smile and said. Ads by PubFuture. My wife is very good with her mouth. You have to try it. But bastard, that's your wife. You can't just offer it like that. The worst thing is that the woman licked her lips and winked at me. What was I supposed to do? After seeing that, I accepted without hesitation, and I'm sure it was the wine talking. Without knowing it, I had fallen into his trap. The three of us left the room where the party was being held and went to his marriage room. Their damn marriage room. It was a bit awkward being naked in front of another man, but at least his wife's body had my full attention. I admit the bastard was right, his wife's mouth is amazing. Her tongue touched me in ways I didn't know were possible. With the games finished, it was time for the main event. It kills me to admit it, but it was fun and a refreshing experience. Between men, we understand each other after all. After moving his wife around like a doll for 1 hour, the bastard took a break. It makes sense, after all, he is a normal person and I am a Sequence 7 Beyander and the protagonist of this era. So from that moment it was his wife and me. Having the husband watch me explore his wife's caverns was certainly weird. After 15 minutes she was showing me the skills of her mouth again, and at that moment I made the biggest mistake of my life. I looked at the ceiling and closed my eyes. I was so absorbed in her mouth that I didn't realize that her husband had knelt next to her. At one point she stopped, but it only lasted a few seconds and then she came back with everything. It seemed that she had become a void that didn't let anything out. That's why I couldn't stand it and end up shooting in her mouth. When I opened my eyes to praise her for her skill, I was met with pure horror. It wasn't her mouth. It was his mouth. The bastard gave me a huge white smile along with his wife as he said, "Which mouth is better? My wife's or mine? I've never hit someone that hard." When I did that, his wife, instead of yelling at me for beating her husband, just laughed out loud. I simply ignored her, got dressed and left the room and the party. Ha 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 ha, what the fuck, Russell, ha ha ha, cough asterisk cough. Adrian laughed so hard he started coughing. Laughing tears fell from his eyes. Of all the things he thought could be written in the diary, this was definitely not one of those things. I knew he was a player, but to know he was played like that. Oh, the irony, Russell. You thought you could blow the mind of the wife, but in the end the one who was blowed was you. And by the husband. An image began to form in his head. Russell's horrified mustachioed face looking at the man that had his little friend in his mouth. As Russell's skin turned white as paper, the man took little Russell out of his mouth with a pop and said, "You came from a man's mouth." His laughter turned lunatic and he even fell to his knees and started punching the ground while holding his stomach. Oh crap. Klein has to read this. This is better than. He could already imagine how Klein would have to have the biggest battle of his life to control his expression. How he wished he could read minds to know what Klein's thoughts would be. Although he wanted to continue to mock the great emperor and his not-so-heterosexual experience, Adrian knew that he could not stay long in the city of calamities. He couldn't stay at the bar because his worm wife might find out that he wasn't working for the boss but was enjoying the gossip of the old men. So with a heavy heart, he had to turn the page. August 7th. Young Beatrice grew up to be a very beautiful woman. She was about 18 years old the last time I saw her. It's been years since I saw her, so seeing how she's changed makes me very happy. August 9th. I'm honestly speechless. Today I attended another of those annoying parties of those damned nobles. I was planning to talk to Amelie to try to hang out with her. She may have a weird obsession with candles, but that woman is really wonderful. But before I could get close to that beautiful blonde woman, young Beatrice cut me off and we started talking. I didn't sleep with her, I watched her grow up. I'm not that wicked. This is one of the few times I have had a good time at a party without sleeping with at least one of the women. 3 to be exact, but who's keeping score? August 12th. Beatrice showed me that she is already a woman and very passionate about it. I expected this, but seriously, you are really shameless. The emperor demonstrated his skill again. At least he still has a bit of morality, he said, thinking that at least Russell had met the girl when she was 18. Shaking his head, he grabbed another page and began to read. April 3rd. Today I have met a woman straight as a board. Her name is Amelie, and despite the fact that she is sexy, her personality is too serious and flat. She's not my type. Ads by PubFuture. April 4th. For whoever is reading this. I've been outclassed and I'm not ashamed in the least. I finally met my superior and it turned out to be Amelie. I have no idea how it happened, but for a moment we went from talking about the weather to me being handcuffed, gagged, and she on top of me with a whip and a black leather corset. It turns out that Amelie's straight-laced personality is just a facade and she's actually a master dominatrix. I never thought that I would be dominated in such a hard way, that I would enjoy it so much, and that I would like tight leather and candle wax. You learn new things about yourself every day. Quote. Russell is the bottom, and he liked it. Another image began to form in his mind. A gagged and handcuffed Russell to the bed was looking at a woman clad in tight leather. The woman was giving him insults and beatings with a whip that made Russell tremble. That's something I didn't expect to read. I don't see Russell accepting this, but I wonder if he ended up taking her from behind at some point. Adrian murmured with a short laugh. This diary is connected to the previous one. Shaking his head, Adrian turned to the next page. January 27th. I found out that this new body is allergic to shrimp. I am sequence 9 and an allergic reaction almost killed me. How is it possible that the protagonist of this era dies in such a humiliating way? June 4th. Not much to say about today, just mentioning that Amelie is still as dominant as ever. July 6th. Today I had horrible diarrhea. Good thing I invented the toilet, since not even in my nightmares do I plan to sit in those prison seats. But the toilet paper is still shit. He got it. These pages must be from his first years in this world. It seems that he didn't always go from bed to bed but from diarrhea to diarrhea. Adrian sighed, a little disappointed. He hoped that he might get some useful information from Russell's diaries, but that would be more difficult than he thought. Shaking his head, he now began to read the last 3 pages of the diary. December 2nd. I returned to the tower. This time I plan to beat the first floor. Ads by PubFuture. I came armed to the teeth with potions, charms, and artifacts. I will not lose again in such a humiliating way. Whoever created this had to be crazy. How come the difficulty of the first floor is so great? What sense does that make? Did Hidetaka Miyazaki also reincarnate in this world and decide to bring Dark Souls to life? No matter how many times I analyze it, I can't understand even the smallest stone in this tower. And the method to enter is still as annoying as ever. It's too random. I finally understand how the people trapped in Aincrad must have felt. But at least they knew how many floors they had to climb. This tower does not give any information on how many floors it has. At least the rewards are very good. Adrian's eyes widened in surprise. A chill ran up his spine and he felt an emptiness in his stomach. Tower. First floor. Aincrad. What the fuck are you talking about, Russell? This is not Sao. Adrian gripped this page of the diary tightly. This wasn't mentioned in Klein's story. Something as rare as this tower would definitely be mentioned, so why? Did something change? Did history change? The chill intensified and Adrian put a hand to his face, covering his eyes. This doesn't make sense, he muttered in disbelief. He was very affected, so closing his eyes he went into a cogitation state. Slowly his emotions calmed down and he was able to open his eyes with a colder but still disturbed mind. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was the city covered in yellowish smoke and the fire soldiers patrolling in the distance. This made the same thought he had when he first appeared here come back. The City of Calamities is not on the seal that covers the western continent as it should be in the original story. The hollow feeling in his stomach had grown stronger and he swallowed. He already knew that history had changed to some extent. Changes that he is unaware of and how they affect his present. When he discovered that he had the City of Calamities, he thought that history had changed in an exaggerated way and that nothing would be the same. But when he spent more time here he noticed that everything followed the course it should follow. That is why he thought that the changes reached that far, without affecting what was important. He was wrong. He quickly turned the page hoping the next one would be a continuation. March 3rd. Last night I had too much to drink and I woke up in my bathroom with a parrot and a raccoon in the tub. I have no idea where they came from. Of course, Adrian said, defeated. Honestly, I should have expected it. Russell's diary is messed up because no one can understand it. At the most they'll be like old Neil and know the numbers, but that's it. Shaking his head, Adrian released the pages of the diary and they hung in the air. Extending his hand he made the papers float to where he kept his things and caused the yellowish smoke to cover them. Flora should know more about this tower. With that done he looked down at his hand and clenched his fist. Now only Pyromaniac remains. It's time to start looking for the ingredients and formula of Conspirator. Let's see. It was the black hunting spider's composite eye and Sphinx's brain, Adrian muttered as he formed a fireball in his hand. Those are the main ingredients of the Sequence 6, Conspirator potion. I need the other half even though it's not necessary. I can go straight ahead and consume the main ingredients to advance if I want. When he said the last part he shook his head. That would be stupid. Maybe I could risk it if it was a potion of Sequence 9 or maximum Sequence 8. But I'm talking about Sequence 6. That is the true mid-sequence during ancient times. It's a 99.99% chance that I'll lose control if I try to do it. So I have to get the other part of the formula. Adrian quickly began to consider the different ways in which he could get it. 5 options appeared. I can try in the Tarot Club to get it, but I doubt it very much. The level of the other members is very low, although maybe Alger can get one or even all 2 main ingredients. Another way is at Teacher Isengard's party, but it's the same as with the current Tarot Club, the level is too low. I also have the church, but I doubt I have enough points for them to give me the formula, so I better rule it out for now. There is also the Hermits of Fate. The level of the meeting is considerable and it is possible to get the formula even if the meeting is a long time away, it is still a very good option. There's also Mr. A's meeting. I can use the fire soldiers to attend without attracting attention and get it, so it's also one of, if not the safest options. Even if I don't get it, I can still try to get the main ingredients there. These were the 4 safest options that had a decent chance of success. Now there was only one left and was the one with a 100% chance of success in getting the formula. Finally, the most dangerous and difficult option. Ambassador Bakerland, he squeezed the fireball making it disappear. Bakerland is the ambassador of the Intis Republic and is also the head of intelligence for Intis. But most important of all, Bakerland is a conspirator. I can use his characteristics to get the complete formula of conspirator, and I can even use them as a replacement for the main ingredients, but there is a problem. This bastard is always surrounded by guards and getting close without being discovered is impossible. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian is confident that he can take on Bakerland one-on-one and win. He just had to use Flora's ability to steal Beyander's powers and the ambassador would be defenseless. But the problem remains the same. He is never alone, and even if I steal his powers he will still have other guards to protect him. Only if it is necessary I will make a plan to hunt him, but for now it is not necessary. I still have options, so for now Bakerland is at the bottom, I will focus on getting the main ingredients first. With the idea of what to do, he closed his eyes and began to form the sphere of light in his mind. Returning to his body in the real world, Adrian opened his eyes. He cleaned and hid everything he used for the ritual, and now he was sitting on the only chair in his room. Flora, do you know something called the tower? The worm woman took a few seconds to respond. It is your lord who asks about this, right? Without a doubt, it was the best decision to say that I follow a real god, he thought as he nodded. My lord is interested in this tower. He is willing to lower your sentence a little if you have useful information. Flora was silent again for a few seconds. Tower is one of the many names given to a large structure hidden somewhere in the spirit world or the astral world. No one knows where it is or what its purpose is. This name was born because it was discovered that it is divided into floors and each one is more difficult than the previous one, explained Flora. So no one knows what its real name is? Adrian asked. Nothing is known about the tower. The only thing that is known is that if you complete a floor you will get a good reward and that the floors go from lowest to highest. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Again, this reward, is it a dungeon like the ones of the manhwas and video games? If you manage to complete it, will you get experience and materials? Obviously, it won't give experience, but the material thing can be. Maybe main or secondary materials, but how does the tower get these things? Wouldn't it end up empty after a while due to those who complete it? Flora, how come the tower can offer rewards? Shouldn't it end up empty after a while due to completion? This is how it would normally be, but this tower is special. The oldest reports of its appearance are during the beginning of the 4th epoch. Besides, getting a good reward is very difficult. Why? Because you have to complete the secondary missions on the floor to get them. Flora's tone turned annoyed, as if she remembered something she didn't like. Side missions? Is it really a dungeon? Adrian thought in amazement, but he also noticed the annoyance in Flora's tone. Flora, it seems you are familiar with this tower. Do you have something you want to get off your chest? Flora snorted but still responded. I could never get past the 3rd floor, and just remembering having to find the entrance to the tower annoys me. Why would finding the entrance be bothersome? Asked Adrian, curious as he remembered how Russell had also complained about this. Ads by PubFuture. The entrance never stays in one place. It always moves around the world, making it very difficult to find. How would you find something that is constantly moving around the world? Adrian asked. First, I have to explain how this works. There are only 2 ways to enter the tower. By accident or if someone brings you. The first way is obvious, you just have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The second way is if someone brings you inside the tower. Once you enter the tower for the first time you will get A. It doesn't matter if you manage to complete the floor or not. This will tell you where the next entrance is and when. I'll assume there's no chance you'll help me into the tower, right? Adrian asked with a smile, but Flora gave a short laugh. Take you to kill us? No thanks. For your little brain to understand, I'll make it simple. The tower adjusts the difficulty level according to the level of the sequences of whoever enters. If the sequence is too high, it will be suppressed to match the difficulty level of the current floor. It is unknown how the tower does it, but even angels are not safe. You should know that the difficulty of the first floor is equal to sequence 7, so most of my abilities will be suppressed. I can only use decipher to keep us alive. I refuse to trust my life in your hands in that situation. Surprise filled Adrian and he couldn't help but widen his eyes. Even angels aren't safe. What the fuck is that tower? Whoever created the tower had to have been a king of angels at least. Knowing that his mind might start to wander to things it shouldn't, Adrian closed his eyes and slipped back into the cogitation state. After a few moments, Adrian opened his eyes, his mind no longer wandering. I will forward this information to my lord. He will be the one who judges its level, Adrian said serenely, and Flora didn't answer. He grabbed one of the goatskin parchment he had and began to write down everything Flora told him in Hermes. After doing that, he prepared another ritual and sacrificed it to himself. He stayed a few minutes in the City of Calamities to keep up appearances. When he considered that enough time has passed, he returned to his body. My lord is satisfied with the information. Flora Jacob, your sentence has been reduced 4 months by the grace of my lord. Adrian said as if he were an apostle revealing the revelations of his God to the people. Praise the mercy of your lord, Flora said reverently, and this brought a soft smile to Adrian's face. Praise his mercy, Adrian said as he closed his eyes, hiding their mischievous glint and maintaining his soft smile. Cheating with a false god is the best.